The Island Date, Do-Over Date Series, Book 7. By Susan Hatler. Chapter 1. I was not pregnant, but after the amount of research I did yesterday on combating morning sickness, I'd so be prepared if and when Prince Charming ever chose to bump into me. In all honesty, it would be fair to say I was as far away from being pregnant as possible, not married, no boyfriend, and hadn't been on a date with someone who was both employed and not wanted by the IRS for tax evasion in months. No matter, though. Today was about helping my friend Jill Parnell, superpower attorney, married to the sweetest guy in the world, but unable to beat the nausea part of her pregnancy. But never fear, Krista Clarke to the rescue. Well, I hoped. Hi, Jill. Sorry I'm late, I said, as I struggled under the weight of bags of fresh ginger, dry ginger, ginger tea, and ginger drops, both crystallized and uncrystallized, I'd brought my friend. Good morning, Krista, Jill said, her third trimester tummy bumping into me as she gave me a hug. What's all of this? A box of saltine crackers tumbled from my arms, bouncing a couple times along the concrete sidewalk before flopping sideways like an ad display to passers-by. I stepped back from my friend and picked the box up. I didn't know which brand would help the best for your nausea, so I just got them all, I said, as if that were obvious. Then I waved at my favorite coffee barista, who stood on the sidewalk behind her coffee cart. Morning, Courtney. The usual, please. A decaf latte for Jill. That's so thoughtful of you, Krista, Jill said, smiling at me as she placed a hand over her belly. You really didn't have to do all of this, but I'm grateful, she said, turning to Courtney. Soon I'll be going back to fully caffeinated. Not a problem. Courtney Carmichael owned the best coffee cart in all of Sacramento and wore the brightest, most cheerful shirts in all of California, and winked as she started making my usual coffee drink, a triple shot of espresso with 2 pumps of caramel and 1 massive dollop of whipped cream. It was just about the only thing that kept me awake through the long, boring workdays. Well, that and researching morning sickness cures for my very pregnant friend. When I balanced my bags to reach into my purse to pay Courtney, Jill placed a hand on my arm and shook her head. I've got this. No, wait, I dug around in my purse, causing a little box of ginger tea to pop out of my arm and onto the pavement. Oops. I ducked down to pick it up. Courtney, Jill said, turning away from me, you'll have a very pregnant, very hormonal attorney to deal with if you accept a single dime from Krista. Courtney finished my drink and handed it over the tiki-inspired cart. Sorry, Krista, she said, taking Jill's card. The pregnant lady trump card wins. Jill grinned victoriously as she sipped her decaf latte. You really didn't have to get the coffees, Jill, I said, wedging a pack of onesies with matching booties under my arm so I could get at the light as air, sweet as heaven whipped cream. I had intended to just buy one baby gift as a mood booster for Jill, but it's simply impossible to stop clicking add to cart when you see all those tiny footsies lined up one after the other. Not my fault that her newborn child will have a new outfit every day of the week. You're the one who's prego. You're creating life. This is the least I can do to help. You helped plenty by covering for me on Monday at the community garden, Jill said, as she went through the onesies, cooing oohs and ahs. I owe you. Jill Parnell founded a nonprofit homeless outreach program called Founding Friendships, which gives the homeless an opportunity to get back on their feet with counseling, housing, and job opportunities. The garden with its fresh fruits and vegetables and herbs was a great way for the participants to take ownership of their lives and pride in their futures. But with Jill suffering from debilitating morning sickness even late into her 3rd trimester, the garden, and other aspects of Founding Friendships, had grown a little rough around the edges. I loved volunteering my time there and received a great amount of satisfaction from helping and seeing the results of my hard work. It was nothing, Jill, I said, and then took a sip of my yummy drink. Really? You know how much I love volunteering at Founding Friendships. Didn't you have to work on Monday though? Jill asked. I dismissed her with a wave of my hand. I took a sick day. No big deal. Courtney finished serving the next customer and glanced over at me with a raised eyebrow. Aren't sick days for, when you're sick? Well, she was sick, I said, nodding toward Jill with a sheepish grin. And I felt sick about the thought of the community garden falling behind. So, technically it was a sick day. Courtney laughed before returning to her long line of customers in the early morning sun. I feel terrible that I can't be there at Founding Friendships more often, Jill said, hand on her belly. I feel like I'm letting everyone down. You just need to get someone in there to help you out, I said, stepping away from the long line forming at the coffee cart. Start delegating. I mean, it's not like you'll suddenly have more time after the baby is born. You sound like my husband, she said, blowing out a breath. I told Ryan I'm used to being able to do so much more on my own, but you're right. We've talked about hiring someone. It's just hard to find someone you can trust, These people were helping mean the world to me. I need to leave them in the hands of someone passionate and capable. I patted Jill's arm as her gaze fell at a onesie that had tiny giraffe babies all over it. Her eyes filled with tears, which was so unlike her. She sniffled as Courtney quickly and astutely passed over a napkin while pouring a cappuccino. I'm sorry, she said, dabbing a tear. It's all the hormones raging through me all the time. I know you have to get back to work. Don't worry about me. I'm just feeling the feelings. I took another sip of coffee. Work can wait. And I wasn't just being polite for my friend's sake. If I could put off heading into work all day, I most certainly would. I was passionate about many things, like my friends, Jill and Julie and Jennifer and Michelle. I was passionate about women's soccer. Don't even bother trying to call me when a game is on TV. And I was passionate about my volunteer work at Founding Friendships. I was not, however, passionate about booking vacations for strangers while tied to a small, cramped desk at Ticket to Anywhere travel agency. I never was passionate about my work and I feared I never would be. But, hey, it paid the bills. And who really loved their job anyway? I mean, besides Courtney, who looked radiant every day behind her coffee cart. And, well, Jill, who owned her own firm with her two equally successful partners. But you love your work, right? She asked, looking concerned. Sure, I lied, glad when that worried look left her face. The last thing I needed was to make her feel worse right now. Well, aren't you going to get in trouble if you're late? Jill asked, sniffling. No, I was just about to say it wasn't a problem at all because my boss was pretty laid back about hours and never got upset really when I received a text from Julie, my friend who also worked at Ticket to Anywhere travel agency. You need to get over here. Now. I think I have to go, I said, looking at Jill with an apologetic smile to hide my racing heart. Thank you for all of these goodies, Krista, she said, pulling me into a quick hug, her belly bumping into me again. Believe me, when your time comes I'll be there for you, too. You're welcome, I said, handing over the bags and boxes and thinking my pregnancy might be so far off in the future she'd need time travel to visit me. Speaking of travel, I picked up my pace as I hurried down the street to my car. The one good thing about my job at the travel agency was the stability. Sure, scheduling other people's cool vacations from a room with no windows made me feel like I'd been shot by a tranquilizer dart and it was hard to stay awake, but the silver lining was that we never had any drama. What on earth could be going on? Chapter 2. As I drove across town to Ticket to Anywhere travel agency, my palms started sweating on the steering wheel as I tried to convince myself it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to get fired. Sure, I'd no longer have income to pay the bills, I'd blow through my savings in about 2.5 months if I lived on beans and rice, and I'd have to take whatever job came my way to not get evicted. Oh, no. What if I got fired? But it wasn't like I wouldn't deserve it, coming in late because I chatted too long with Courtney in the mornings while fetching my much-needed coffee, leaving to do things for founding friendships when I wasn't really sick, and researching online for ways to help relieve my friend's nausea between calls with clients. Suffice it to say, I'd never be nominated for Ticket to Anywhere travel agency's Employee of the Month. I pulled into a parking stall, jumped out of the car and hurried across the parking lot. I stepped inside the office, rushing past posters of vacation spots from all over the world and bracing myself for getting canned. In the conference room, I found the entire staff gathered around Andrea McKinney, the founder and owner, who looked at me as I entered. Gulp. "Ah, good, Krista's here," she said, surprising me with a smile. "We can begin." I paused for a moment, heart racing, to see if she'd say anything to me about being late or, clearing out my desk. But she just waved me in, so I nodded and then found a spot beside my friend and coworker Julie, who, quite the opposite of me, had actually been Employee of the Month 3 months in a row. Knowing Julie, she'd been as early as I'd been late. "What's going on?" I whispered, setting down my purse and slipping off my jacket. "She has a big announcement," Julie whispered and then straightened as if she were super eager to hear the news. At least I wasn't going to lose my job. The ability to pay rent was kind of a good thing. "Cute shirt," I said, noticing the ironed collar of Julie's blouse. "Shoo," she whispered, keeping her attention on our boss. Cringing, I smoothed the front of my shirt which had wrinkled from balancing the boxes of saltines against it. Then I glanced down at the sneakers I'd forgotten to switch out and my cheeks heated. With my usual ponytail and freckles instead of blush or highlighter, I looked more ready for the soccer field than the office, especially when standing next to Julie. "Okay, everyone," Andrea said, taking a deep breath. There was an excited, nervous smile on her face. "You have no idea how bittersweet this moment is for me." And I debated back and forth all night about starting with the bitter or starting with the sweet. Julie and I glanced at one another. "First of all, I'm getting remarried," she announced, flashing a diamond engagement ring as her cheeks turned pink. Cheering and clapping erupted throughout the conference room. "Thank you," she said, looking embarrassed and excited at the same time. "I'm so very happy. But as you can tell, that's the sweet part of my news. Unless we're talking about the reduction of my soon-to-be husband's closet space, which may be a little bitter for him." She winked and we laughed. Then she clasped her hands in front of her. "The bitter part of my announcement, my dear friends, is that I'm taking this opportunity to retire and travel the world with the man I love. I've spent decades planning travel for others, and now it's my turn." We clapped again and murmured agreements. My chest fell a little as I brought my hands together, because she'd pretty much summed up how I felt about the job, especially when a client asked if I'd been to Bermuda or Thailand or Fiji. Each time, I got this empty feeling in the pit of my stomach even though I felt perfectly content in my apartment living my routine. I, along with everyone else around me I was sure, felt a sense of sadness at Andrea's departure. She had been a smart, caring, driven leader who always put her employees first. I wished her all the happiness with her new life, but the obvious next question was unavoidable: who would be taking over? Andrea hushed us all with good-natured laughter. "All right," she said, her voice rising above the fast-traveling whispers of speculation. "There's actually a little more news." Julie and I turned to each other with our eyebrows raised. Now she'd drop another bombshell. Would she be selling the company? I wasn't fired, but would I be out of a job? "I'm sure some of you have already started wondering who your new boss will be," Andrea said, looking at each of us in turn. I'm not going to keep you in suspense, but rest assured that your new boss will be someone just as enthusiastic about this company as me. In fact, I happen to know him very well because your new boss is my son. I'd heard Andrea had a son, but I'd never met him. He'd never been in the office. Never dropped by. Never called. I wasn't even sure where he lived or what he did for a living before deciding to take over his mom's business. Huh. Since I want you to get a good chance to know your new boss well. She rubbed her hands together as if we were about to get to the really good stuff. I've decided to send you all on a company retreat in a very special place. When Andrea smiled, there was a little mischievous twinkle in her eyes. Was it at Capitol Park? A fancy dinner on the terrace of the Jeffries Hotel? Maybe a trip all the way out in San Francisco? She had our attentions, each of us hanging on to her words. She leaned in conspiratorially. I didn't think it could possibly be as far away as Disneyland. That was the farthest I'd ever traveled, and it was like 9 hours away. Too far for a work meeting, of course. Surely not that far then. Andrea grinned from ear to ear, clapped her hands together, and then shouted joyfully, I'm sending you all to meet your new boss in Tahiti. My chin dropped and my eyes bulged. Clearly, I hadn't heard her correctly. It sounded like she said Tahiti. After a moment of stunned silence, Andrea gave a quick reassurance that no, she wasn't joking at all, and yes, we were all spending 2 weeks in French Polynesia. The office erupted into squeals, applause, and happy chaos. Except for me, my stomach dropped. Can you believe our good luck? Julie said, grabbing my hands and jumping up and down. Tahiti? Tahiti. We're going to Tahiti. I managed a half-hearted, yay. Julie was too excited to notice the clamminess of my palms, the nervous biting of my lip, and the fact that my heart had stopped. Think of all the wonderful things we're going to get to experience, Julie continued, despite being nearly out of breath from her squealing. Snorkeling and hiking and ATVING, is that a word? Oh, who cares? And we'll also. The list running through my head went a little differently. I don't speak French. I've never been on a plane. Fear of heights, a reason not to get on a plane. What if I get lost? What is the currency there? Is it okay to drink the water there? What if I get food poisoning? How am I going to volunteer with founding friendships from across the ocean? I can't wait to meet the new boss, Andrea's son, Julie said, as my dread made me mute. I have so many ideas to improve the business that I want to run by him. You know? I said, wondering if planes carried parachutes in case of emergency. I have to start planning how I'll present my ideas, Julie said, grabbing hold of my arm, which felt numb much like the rest of my body. Perhaps I'll separate the ideas by category? Marketing and advertising and or I could rank my ideas? Best to worst? Should I put them in a PowerPoint presentation? She asked, beginning to look frantic. A PDF? I'll have to pack my laptop, I'm sure. And my power cord. And my laser pointer. Can laser pointers go through TSA? Oh, there's so much to do. Julie squeezed me tight in a fierce hug and then hurried off to her desk, practically buzzing with excitement. There was really only one thing going through my mind: I don't want to go anywhere. Oh, and another thing, I don't have a suitcase. After sinking into my office chair, I got out my phone and texted my friend Jennifer Page, who, luckily enough, owned a luggage store, know of a good suitcase for 2 weeks in Tahiti. Her response was fast, OMG, are you going on a secret honeymoon with a secret hubby? I snorted. If only. I texted back, mandatory business trip. She wrote back, "Lucky ducky. Dylan has been trying to get me to go kayaking in Tahiti. But I've been so busy since we opened the online store. Are you totally stoked?" At first, I typed, "Honestly, I'm kinda scared." But then I stared at it and with a sigh deleted it. I sent this instead, "Totally." She wrote back, "Squeal." There, I'd convinced my friend. Now I just had to convince myself. Flying 35,000 feet above the earth for hours and hours? Yikes! Chapter 3. Fear wasn't always a rational feeling. I was very aware of this truth. For example, wearing my seatbelt extra tight and gripping the armrests of my seat wasn't going to keep the airplane from plummeting to the ocean. But, hey, something about it made me feel safer, so I would just take what I could get and go with it. Unfortunately, after way too many hours in the air and 3 pineapple juices with vodka, I needed to use the restroom. The tiny, claustrophobic restroom, without windows or a seatbelt. But I was a grown woman of 29 years and I could do this. People use the bathroom on flights all the time. It's not like walking down the aisle would tip the plane, right? Oh, no. What if walking down the aisle tipped the plane? "I have to use the restroom," I said, twisting my stiff neck to look at Julie. My muscles were so tense that I'd need a massage after this flight was over. "Good idea," she said, flipping the page of her People magazine nonchalantly. My throat went dry as I prepared to unbuckle the seatbelt. "Okay, I'm going to do this." "You can do it," she assured me, stuffing the magazine into the seat pocket in front of her. "Yes, I can," I said, closing my eyes and taking a deep breath before releasing the armrest to unbuckle the seatbelt. Click. The strap was no longer around my waist nor keeping me attached to the plane. I was at the cabin's mercy now if we should, take a nosedive. Eek! "Scooch," Julie said, unbuckling her seatbelt with ease and making a motion with her hands. "Where are you going?" I asked, staring at her wide-eyed. Her blue eyes rounded. To the bathroom?" "Hello?" "I just told you I was going," I said, clicking my seatbelt back into place. "Yeah, it made me realize I have to go, too." "Now scooch." I rolled my eyes. "We can't go at the same time." "Why not?" My purse?" I whispered, as firmly as possible at this low decibel. "Our passports. Our Tahiti money, whatever it's called." She blew out a breath. "It's fine." "How do you know that?" I asked, looking around me. The bald guy across the aisle in the palm tree button-up had his eyes closed and mouth ajar. The woman on the other side of Julie was reading a hardback book called An Unlikely Killer, which didn't exactly give me the warm fuzzies. "We're surrounded by total strangers," I whispered. "We're flying to Tahiti," she said, stating the obvious. "So?" I asked. "So, it costs a lot to be here." "How is that a good reason to leave our stuff unattended?" "Well, if people have the money to pay for an expensive plane ticket, then they aren't going to take our things," she said, and then started making the motions with her hands again. "We didn't pay a dime for these tickets," I said, completely invalidating her argument. "Our boss did." "Well, I don't steal." "Do you?" Ignoring her, I continued, not to mention that the airline employees didn't pay for a plane ticket and I've heard flight attendants don't get paid well. "That makes them a thief?" "Fine, go to the bathroom." "I'll wait until you get back," I said, even though my belly was starting to cramp. "No, you go," she said, pointing a finger. "Fine, I will," I said, reaching for my seatbelt buckle but then pausing. "I mean, really, Julie." At what point did you start trusting total strangers with your valuables? Would you go to Starbucks and leave your wallet on the table if you have to use the restroom? No. We're not at a Starbucks. Still, I said, seeing in her eyes that I wasn't getting through to her. Would you leave your purse if we were on a cheap domestic flight? Maybe. Southwest? Okay, no. I tucked my chin. Why not? Well, for starters, if the airline doesn't trust you enough to assign your seat, then how can I trust them with my wallet? Exactly. And to people who fly on private jets, this commercial airline is Southwest Airlines. Get it? Would you just go to the bathroom? She said, falling back into her seat. I've made my point. So, yes. Ding! Ding! Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the passenger seatbelt sign as we are now starting our descent. Please take this time to gather your trash as the flight attendants will be coming around to collect them. Again, you can no longer move around the cabin. We'll be arriving in Tahiti soon. Mahalo nui. I clamped both armrests and turned to Julie, who shrugged. Why did I agree to this trip? There are 3 stages of sleepiness. There's the after-lunch lag where not even a triple shot of espresso from Courtney's coffee cart can keep your eyelids open. There's the dazed and confused zombie-like sleepiness from tossing and turning all night stressing about an international flight over a massive body of water. And then there's the kind of sleepiness from being unable to catch a wink due to crying babies and overzealous seat recliners and peanut crunchers and the terror of plummeting to your death. This was how tired I felt just after 10:30 on our first night in Tahiti. Unfortunately, I still couldn't sleep. I felt out of sorts. Maybe a walk on the beach would relax me enough to catch some Z's. Julie, who was my roommate, immediately fell fast asleep, of course, with her laminated and bound ideas for the new boss booklet lying open across her chest since she'd passed out while reviewing it. Exhausted, but also wide awake and restless, I slipped out of the room as quietly as possible, though I was sure a tsunami wouldn't wake her. The woman was annoyingly comfortable with traveling to a foreign land. I needed to walk, to stretch my legs, and although it made me nervous being in a foreign country for the first time, I was fairly certain even I wouldn't get lost at our 5-star resort, the Tiara Luxury Resort and Spa, named after the national flower of French Polynesia. I strolled past the restaurant and bar terraces overlooking the indigo skies and expansive teal pools of the resort, nearly hidden amongst lush vegetation and bursts of night-blooming flowers. Hibiscus and jasmine twisted in the warm night air, fragrant with the salt from the tides, and I breathed in the intoxicating scent. This was one of the many differences between posters of island vacations and the place itself. I walked down onto the beach where the light sands glowed nearly blue beneath the full moon in a sky full of stars. I slipped off my shoes and wiggled my toes in the cool sand, which was no longer hot from the heat of the day. Okay, if you ignored the whole travel by air thing, even I had to admit that this wasn't so bad once you arrived. When I didn't think about what might be swimming in those dark waters that stretched to the horizon or how many miles I was from my bed in Sacramento, this island was almost enjoyable. I could hear the faint sound of the music from the resort, and it seemed in perfect harmony with the rustle of the wind through the tall palm trees. I strolled along the water's edge, not yet daring to let the rush of foamy tide sweep over my exposed toes. Baby steps, I told myself. Dry, or at least, mostly dry, baby steps. As I stared at the sand in front of me, a piece of paper fluttered along the sands toward my feet. I caught it before it could blow past me and stuffed it into my pocket. How could someone litter on such a beautiful stretch of nature? Sigh. I resumed my walk only to find 2 more pieces of paper just like the first one scuttling along. I trapped these under my foot and corralled them into my pocket. Really, the nerve to toss trash onto the beach. Littering is a crime, people. Or, at least it is in the States. Under the beautiful sky, I ambled on and then stumbled upon a whole quivering, tumbling trail of papers that looked like white, floundering fish along the shore. I collected each and every one, crammed them into my stuffed pocket, and huffed. How dare someone be so careless, so disrespectful? What kind of person could leave such a mess in good conscience? There were dozens of papers in front of me now. Grumbling, I leaned down to pick them up, tucking some under my arms, wedging some under my chin, and stuffing some into my shoes. I needed a garbage can pronto. I finally came across what seemed to be the epicenter of the beach littering, an abandoned black backpack, unzipped and thus leaving its contents prey to the warm, gentle wind. I put my hands on my hips, wondering who would abandon a bag of papers. I was sure the cause for this mess must be the worst kind of person. I was sure that this person must be irresponsible and extremely unlikable in every way imaginable. I was quite sure that should I see this person I would give them a piece of my mind. Just then a man came sputtering to the surface of the water behind me. He clung to handfuls of limp and soaked papers as he waded in waist-deep toward even more papers floating unceremoniously along the crystal surface of the water. The man had well-defined abs, muscular arms, and his blonde hair fell over green eyes that sparkled in the moonlight as he approached. "Do you need help?" I asked. His arm jerked up as if I'd surprised him as he came toward the shore where I stood at the water's edge. "Oh, hi there," he called. "Hi," I said, noting he didn't seem to have a French accent. I assessed that he looked more handsome than dangerous, so I lifted a handful of papers in the air. "You lose something? Or hundreds of somethings?" His forehead wrinkled. I've kind of made a mess of things, haven't I?" Definitely no accent. "Seems like a little bit of a mess," I agreed. "It's my manuscript," he said, right before a wave fell over him and he emerged spitting water and shaking his hair from his eyes in a most adorable way. "It's years of my life literally sinking into the ocean," he added with a pained laugh. "Do you want me to help? Won't your clothes get wet?" he asked. I glanced down at my women's soccer jersey and blue jean shorts. "Good point," I said. "It's really all right," he said, snatching a piece of paper before the current carried it out into the depths. "I've totally got it under control here." "Well, good luck then," I said, stuffing what I'd salvaged into the backpack and then zipping it up. "Thanks much." He gave a half wave and lunged in the water for another piece only to miss it by a few inches. I turned back toward the safety and comfort of the resort. After all, I was meeting the new boss of the company tomorrow and I needed to get some sleep with whatever was left of the night. It wasn't practical to waste potential sleeping time on the beach with a total stranger. And he did have a point about my clothes getting wet. It'd be a pain to dry them and... Before I could make sense of what I was doing, I found myself knee-deep in water. I left the shore behind, not even looking back at the twinkling lights of the resort as I moved farther and farther into the sea of stars. I grabbed that floating page of the man's manuscript before swimming toward him. Water lapped at my face, salt stinging my tongue, and my clothes felt heavy on my body, but it felt exhilarating being in this warm water this late at night, just the two of us at the edge of the universe. "I decided to help you," I said, laughing as I paddled toward him and his scattered icebergs of manuscript. "What can I say? I can't stand littering." He extended a hand to help me as he laughed, too. "You got your clothes wet." "Yeah, they might be a little damp," I said, taking his hand. He grinned, his eyes reflecting the stars as he pulled me closer. "I'm Mason." "I'm Krista." Yeah, there was no way I was going to fall asleep now. Chapter 4. Mason and I sat side by side on the sand under the moon with my hair dripping wet and our clothes clinging to our bodies as we heaved and gasped for air. Beside us sat a sad-looking pile of hundreds of pages of barely legible manuscript we'd collected after emerging from the ocean with our armfuls of paper that was quickly reverting back to pulp. I hadn't had this much of a workout since tryouts for the soccer team in college. There was a pinch in my side, a burn in my lungs, and a big smile on my face. Normally, I did safe and steady and boring things like stick to my routine. Go to work, play soccer, make dinner, and watch TV. I didn't do anything exotic like hang out with a handsome stranger on the beach. Ever. Maybe it was sleep deprivation that made me say yes, or the fact that I was on a foreign island, or the intoxicating ocean scent in the breeze, or his smile that gave me goosebumps. Think I'll be able to salvage any of the manuscript? Mason asked. Do you want an optimistic answer or a realistic answer? I asked, glancing up at the moon hanging high and bright above us before turning my head in his direction. Grains of sand clung to my cheek and hair as I listened to the sound of crashing waves behind us. I've never been much of a realist, he said, looking into my eyes so deeply I felt a little zing in my belly. Let's go with optimistic, he said. Optimistically, I said, taking a breath and trying to calm the butterflies taking up residence in my belly, you'll get a line or two from a few pages. That's your idea of optimism? He asked, putting a hand to his chest indignantly. What in the world was the realistic answer? I shrugged, my lips twitching. Realistically, you exerted yourself, got soaking wet and really should learn to zip up your bag when there's a breeze. You're not going to be able to get much off those papers. Too much damage. I see, he said, the corner of his mouth lifting. Well, realistically, I could print my manuscript again if that had been my reason for collecting the pages. But, honestly, I didn't want to litter or have a fish or sea animal choke on my draft. Ah, that's sweet, I said, loving that he was so responsible in his motives. That's a much better realistic reason. His green eyes glimmered as he stared into mine. I prefer my optimistic reason though, that I exerted myself, got soaking wet, and spent an hour of my life serendipitously because I got to meet you, a generous woman who was willing to risk it all. By getting her clothes wet? I asked, wrinkling my nose. Hey, I'm trying to express my optimism here, he said, placing a warm finger to my lips. His touch made my lips buzz like a strong tequila sunrise. Now where was I? He asked. Meeting generous me, I murmured against his finger. Yes, he said, his eyes flashing and his finger brushing my cheek as he dropped his hand. Thank you for helping this damoiseau in distress. I laughed, shaking my head. A what? A damoiseau, he repeated. A male damsel. It's derived from the French. You speak French? I asked, rolling over to my side to face him better. Oui, je parle français, he said, rolling onto the sand, so the tips of our noses were a mere foot apart. He smiled at me. I'm guessing that means, yes? I nestled my hands under my cheek, using them as a makeshift pillow while resting on the sand under the twinkling stars above. There was something about being with this handsome non-litterer on an island in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the night that made me feel all dizzy. Or, maybe that was the lack of sleep. Either way, it was not like me to feel this comfortable with a stranger. But I felt relaxed and at ease with Mason, and he had the most beautiful smile. I do speak French, he said, pushing up onto his elbows. I've traveled quite a bit and try to pick up as much of the language and culture as I can along the way. Is that what you're writing about? Your travels? He looked surprised for a moment. Actually, yes. The book I'm working on that you helped rescue from the ocean is a travel book of sorts. I raised a curious eyebrow. Of sorts? It's not your typical travel book, he said, looking a little shy as he played with the grains of sand in the small space between us. For instance, the chapter on Paris doesn't include the Eiffel Tower. At all? I asked, thinking of the Eiffel Tower poster on the wall at the office. He shook his head. My book tells stories from the real people that live in Paris. I talk about where the locals like to eat, where they like to dance, where they like to listen to music and take romantic strolls and fight passionately with their lovers. The real Paris. Sounds exotic, I said, wondering how long a plane ride to Paris would be. He grinned over at me and told me more about his travels. He owned a condo in Florida, but had barely been there the past several years due to traveling to India and Bulgaria, Argentina and Brazil, France and Sweden, and Portugal and New Zealand. The deep bass of his voice transported me to teeming jungles and barren deserts, bustling cities and quiet mountain towns, graffitied ruins and skyscrapers so tall they pierced the clouds. What about you? Have you traveled a lot? He asked. Actually, I don't have too many frequent flyer miles racked up, I admitted, with a sheepish grin. This is the furthest I've been from home. Never too late to start traveling if it's calling you, he said, his voice low. What a very optimistic thing to say, I said, with a little sadness in my voice. I searched his eyes as he kept them steadily on mine. I wasn't sure how long we'd laid here on the beach together. It was at least long enough for our clothes and hair to dry, but I wasn't in the least bit ready to leave. I thought about the guys I'd dated and how I'd always felt a nervous discomfort about how to keep the conversation going. With Mason, conversation seemed effortless and easy. All right, your turn, he said, his eyes flashing mischievously as he scooted a little closer to me in the sand. Realistically, you only have time on this planet to see one place before it's bon voyage forever, he said, the corners of his mouth twitching. What'll it be? I drummed my fingers in the sand between us and shrugged. I don't know, I said. He narrowed his eyes. Sure, you do. I shook my head. I really don't. I'm not that brave or adventurous. I can see in your eyes you have a place in mind but aren't sure you want to tell me, he said, as if reading my mind. Whisper it in my ear, Krista. I won't tell anyone you're brave and adventurous. Just like I won't tell them you recklessly dived into the ocean tonight. I bit my bottom lip and leaned toward his ear, thinking of the destination on the poster over my desk that I never dared to dream of traveling to, at least not until tonight. Thailand, I whispered, feeling exposed and vulnerable, so I sat upright. He sat up, too, giving me a warm smile. I knew you had something in mind. I brushed a piece of hair out of my eyes and tucked it behind my ear. It was then that I noticed a thin line of hazy gold along the horizon. The sun was coming up. Mason pulled his cell from the bag and checked the time. With a little tinge of disappointment, I realized our night, was over. He was about to say that he needed to get some sleep. It was the practical thing to do, after all. I mean, I needed sleep, too. Not that I was the least bit confident I could fall asleep given the thundering of my heart. My chin had fallen forlornly to my chest when Mason finally spoke. With a frown, I glanced up at him. What did you say? I said. He stood and offered me his hand. Are you hungry? Would you like to get some breakfast? The correct answer was, no, sorry, I need to get going. The practical answer was, no, sorry, but I'm meeting my boss in just a couple of hours and I need that time to apply concealer to the bags beneath my eyes. The realistic answer was, yes, I'm starving, but I can't. I shouldn't. I want to. But I won't. The exotic answer was simply, yes. Quite unlike me, I gave the exotic answer. Chapter 5. 20 minutes later, I waited for Mason in the lobby of the same resort where I was staying, the smell of fresh bacon and eggs and fruit and croissants wafting almost irresistibly from the buffet in the dining room. My stomach growled with hunger just as Mason came down after dropping off the ruined remains of his manuscript in his room. "Let's dive in," I said, to which my stomach grumbled in agreement. But as I turned for the buffet in the dining room, Mason turned the opposite direction toward the parking lot. I raised my hand. My rental car is out front," he said, nodding toward the open front doors. I stopped and crossed my arms over my empty, protesting stomach. "Are we eating rubber and metal for breakfast?" I asked. Mason chuckled and jogged over to interlace his fingers with mine. My skin tingled against his and my tummy gave a little whirl of approval. "Come on," he said, leading me stumbling after him as I looked back longingly at the bustling buffet. "I'm hungry for an adventure." "I'm hungry for an omelet," I said, wondering what he was up to. Mason opened the passenger door for me and I crammed into the tiny, electric blue Peugeot, glancing at the stick shift, and he hurried around to the driver's side. "Not an automatic?" I asked, having previously wondered if stick shifts were merely legendary. "It's going to be worth it," he assured me. He drove out of the resort, passing the row of other resorts along the beach, and going so far along the coast that soon there were no resorts at all. The first hints of brilliant golden sunlight illuminated untouched beaches and palms and crystal waters. But it was only when we entered a small, run-down-looking town that Mason suggested rolling down the windows. "This is Tahiti," he explained in almost a hushed, reverent whisper, "which is the capital city, and it's just waking up. Close your eyes and listen." I eyed him hesitantly. "Is this a joke?" "So suspicious." He grinned and leaned across me to roll down the manual window. He then returned to his seat, but his hand lingered behind, coming to rest on my forearm. I felt the heat of his fingers like sun-kissed sands between my toes. He squeezed my arm and glanced over at me. "Trust me," he said. "Just close your eyes." With one last look at his hand on me, skin against skin, I allowed my eyes to flutter closed as the slight breeze from the open window danced against my eyelids. Mason remained quiet as I listened. The only reminder of his presence was the searing heat of his touch. First, I heard music from a crackling, staticky old radio. Next, I heard greetings, chatter, laughter, the clinking of cups and saucers, bare feet on stone, impromptu tangos around the kitchen table, the shaking of fresh laundry, the sizzling of eggs, and the babbling of babies. As I listened, the sounds weaved into a morning symphony whose rhythm swelled with each passing block. It was only when Mason pulled his hand away to shift down to park that I opened my eyes. I hadn't realized just how long I'd kept my eyes closed. "Wow," I said, releasing my hair from behind my ear. I felt so swept up in it all. He smiled. "I'm glad you did." We stared deep into each other's eyes before I laughed nervously and looked away, clearing my throat. I wasn't used to a man paying so much attention to me. Usually, my dates were trying to impress me with a fancy car or an expensive dinner. But, Mason? He was actually talking to me and listening to me. I mean, not that this was a date. Or, was this a date? What else could it be? I swallowed. So where are we? The corners of his mouth curved upward. "Just my favorite place in all of Tahiti." "Oh, really?" I smiled, loving his passion as I watched him through the windshield as he jogged around the front of the car, opened my door, and offered his hand. I slipped out as he swept his arm over a large market hall with tall glass windows. "This is Le Marché and it's filled with wonders." I blocked the dazzling morning rays with my hand as I squinted up at him. "And food?" He laughed, putting an arm around my shoulders. "And food." He guided me inside the bustling market. It was busy and loud and chaotic with people jostling each other and speaking rapidly in French. It was the very definition of outside my comfort zone. But Mason's hand on the small of my back felt like a steadying, comforting force as I walked in with him. You have to smell these, he said, guiding us to a table adorned with spices like piles of rubies, topaz, fire opal, tourmaline, emerald, and citron, all sparkling in the morning light. I barely had time to glance across the myriad of names before Mason swept me like a warm current to the next booth where a mountain of fresh fruits seemed ready to topple off the simple wood table. Mason spoke in French to the booth attendant, who nodded and lifted a large fruit that looked like a grapefruit. He says the pamplemousse is perfectly ripe, he explained as the attendant cut the fruit with a large knife, handing one half to Mason and the other half to me. Mason stuck his nose close to it and breathed in deeply while I just stared at the massive fruit cupped in my hands. It's sweeter than grapefruit, you know, Mason said, handing over some bills to the attendant. Try it. By my estimations, I would need a spoon, a knife, and most certainly a wet wipe or two in order to take a bite. But how do I eat this? He winked at me. The best way, of course. By just diving in. I watched as he bit into the fruit, juice smearing across his nose and chin and cheeks. It was kind of the way we ate oranges during a break in soccer. I apprehensively followed his lead and audibly sighed at the invigorating mix of tart and sweet against my tongue. Oh, wow, I said, my taste buds reeling. I've never tasted anything like this. See? An adventure, he laughed when I went in for more, hardly even noticing when the juice dripped all down my wrists. Together, we weaved through the local crowd, devouring our fruit, and laughing at each other's sticky faces. He seemed goofy and fun and down to earth. Not at all like my previous dates I'd been on. I felt relaxed and almost youthful. Next, Mason showed me carts with colorful, intricately hand-embroidered dresses, richly colored, hand-woven baskets, and numerous other artisan crafts in an array of rainbow colors. He pointed out local vegetables, pastries, meats, and cheeses. He had me try anything and everything, laughing and joking with the French-speaking vendors. I thought there couldn't possibly be more to see, to taste, to smell, to experience and drink in like a sweet wine, but then Mason threaded his fingers between mine and pulled me behind him to a booth where a woman was making leis from fresh-cut flowers. The sweet scent wafted up my nose as I stood quietly beside him as he spoke to her. She nodded, smiled at me, and put aside what she was working on. What did you say? I asked, looking up at him. He leaned toward me, and his lips were fragrant from the grapefruit. I asked her to make a lei for you, he said. I glanced at the dozens of already finished leis hanging from the cart. What's wrong with those? I wondered. There was a sparkle in his eyes as he looked down at me. Nothing, he said, looking a little shy for a moment. But I wanted her to make one from tiara patahai. I fumbled over the words as I tried to repeat them. I took Spanish in college. Tiara patahai, he repeated slowly. Yeah, I said, nodding. That word. Why tire, why that one? He smiled with his palm on my cheek, his eyes on mine. The busy market, with all its noise and color and life, faded into a silent background before the vibrant green of Mason's eyes. Because the tiara patahai is the rarest of flowers on Tahiti, he whispered. And I have a feeling, Krista, that you're rare as well. I bit my bottom lip. Realistically or optimistically? My breath stuttered when he stared into my eyes. Both, he said. And I decided I loved this adventure. Chapter 6. Mason and I sipped our espressos in comfortable silence from a second-floor patio at the back of the market hall. Below us, vendors sold fruits and vegetables, fresh flower crowns, crafts and local wares. And stretching into the distance was the city of Papeete, an old stone clock tower, a vibrant square, and narrow, winding streets waking up with morning traffic, food carts, and giggling children off to school. Past that was the ocean, sparkling like a jewel in the brilliant sunlight. The aroma of the espresso was rich and invigorating as I cupped the chipped antique china painted with pink tropical flowers. The lingering taste from the grapefruit was all the sweetener that either of us needed. I closed my eyes with a contented sigh, even while feeling the effects of a night without sleep as the sun warmed my skin. The sudden realization that I had indeed been up all night, and not just that, up all night with a stranger, made me laugh. This was so unlike me. But I'd never felt so full of life. The thought created a nagging worry in the pit of my stomach. Mason glanced across the small cafe table at me and set down his espresso with a pleasant clink like a bell. "Everything all right?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "This is all you're just," my voice trailed off and I hid my sudden shyness behind the lip of my espresso cup. "Isn't this a good thing?" he asked. "I'm not sure." I turned and watched the waves crashing against the pristine beaches in the shimmering distance and hesitated. The palm trees swayed gently in the cool morning breeze as if dancing along with the rhythm of Papeete. When I finally looked over at Mason, I found his gaze on mine. His green eyes rivaled the trees and the lush inland mountains. There was no judgment, just readiness to listen. I rubbed at the back of my neck and laughed a little nervously. If I'm being honest, I searched for the right words to express how I felt. Well, I'd kind of stopped expecting this from life. He frowned. Expecting what? I gestured with my hand at the stunning waters, the energetic city, the colorful market, and him. How was I to put into words the entirety of my night with Mason, the surprises all around me, the surprises within me? Mason had shown me the possibility of a new, vibrant, beautiful world that I would have continued to remain blind to if it hadn't been for pages scattered across the sands like stepping stones to him. But even more meaningful than that, he'd shown me the possibility of a new, vibrant, beautiful life for me. I'd stopped expecting life to be exciting, I said, trying to explain as I held Mason's steady gaze. It's like Christmas as a child. Simply, sweetly perfect. Every day should feel like Christmas. He reached across the table to hold my hand. I traced the calluses on his fingers, each one a story I wanted to hear, with nothing but the stars above us, the ocean behind us, and only a few grains of sand between us. Mason waited patiently for me to continue. With a deep sigh, I said, ever since I was young, I had a dream for my life, a fixed idea of what my perfect life would be. Something specific in mind? My eyes darted over to Mason. I was afraid of saying too much too soon. I was unsure whether he wanted to hear any of this. But I found his attention fixed on me, as if I were the most important thing and not the most beautiful landscape in the world just a head's turn away. He squeezed my hand and I took a bracing breath. Since I was young, I loved soccer, I said, looking into those comforting green eyes. I couldn't even remember a time when a ball wasn't at my feet. And all I wanted was to keep playing and make it my career. When I didn't make a professional team after college, my dream died. And it wasn't just that particular dream dying. What do you mean? It was like my time for dreaming died, I said, glancing out at the ocean, before turning back to him. I didn't even realize this until now. I'd talked with friends after I was cut, of course. They were all supportive, but I'd never opened up about what it meant to me, not even to myself. I wasn't sure why I felt so comfortable sharing the darkest recesses of my heart with this man I'd known less than 24 hours. Maybe it was the lack of sleep. Maybe it was him. I told myself it was time to be practical, I said, my throat tightening as I remembered back. Time to be responsible and realistic. It was time to be an adult, whatever that means. He grinned. It means what we want it to mean. I paused, considering what he'd said. For me, it meant taking the first job offer to pay the bills, which is what I did. And you don't want anything else? He asked, his voice kind and tender. Anything more than that from life? A piercing pain sliced my heart. I think I'm afraid to. I understand, he said, leaning toward me, his thumb brushing along my hand in comforting circles. The morning sunlight danced in his green eyes as we gazed at each other. I wanted to tell him that I didn't feel afraid when I was with him. I wanted to also say that I wouldn't be afraid for his lips to move closer to mine, to taste a new, vibrant, beautiful dream. My lips parted and I wanted to give in to this exotic spell I seemed to be under, but at the same time the clock tower across the square chimed dong, 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 dong. The bells sounded lovely and mystical. Doves flew into the light blue sky from the rafters. I found myself counting the tolls and my heart clenched when it struck the 8th. It's 8 o'clock, I said, my face going numb as I realized what this meant. Suddenly, I shoved back my chair and nearly knocked over the rest of my espresso. I have to go. His eyes widened. Why? I'm sorry, but I have to go. I have to go. Well, at least let me give you a ride, he asked, as I slipped off my lei, the delicate white flowers pulling on the table, their petals still wet with dew catching the morning rays. I shook my head and pulled my arm away from him. It will be faster if I get a cab. Krista! Mason called after me, but I was already hurrying down the stairs and weaving through the crowded market hall. Besides, I could barely hear him over the thud of my heart. My only thought, like a record on repeat, was just how irresponsibly I had acted. Like a love-struck teenager. Like a silly romantic with her head in the clouds instead of her feet on the ground. Like a dreamer. I'd come to this island for work. It was 8 o'clock and I was supposed to be meeting my new boss, the one who decided whether I kept my job or lost it. I couldn't afford to be out of work, which meant I couldn't show up late. No matter how much I enjoyed that dream world with Mason, the reality was I couldn't blow off my job, no matter how much I might be tempted. Chapter 7. As it turned out, my panicked cab ride back to the resort from Papeete, fishing grains of sand out of my hair, wiping grapefruit juice stickiness from my cheeks, and trying to smooth out the wrinkles from my ocean-dipped shirt was all for nothing. 30 minutes late, I burst into the hotel lobby where we were scheduled to meet and was ready to fall down on my knees in front of my new boss to beg for mercy. Instead, I found my small group of co-workers lounging on the tan couches and wicker chairs, staring at me with a bored expression. "Welcome," Julie said, shaking her head and widening her eyes as she looked me up and down. "I'm not sure I should ask where you've been." I stopped in front of Julie, glancing around the lobby, but no new boss was in sight. "Where is he?" I asked, straightening my shoulders and rubbing my oh-so-sleepy eyes in attempt at some semblance of professionalism. "Where's the new boss?" "That's a great question." Julie's gaze trailed over me from head to toe. I noted that whereas I was a mess, she wore navy slacks, peep-toe heels, and a matching suit jacket over her t-shirt. Her hair was styled and her makeup done. A binder labeled Ideas was tucked under her arm. However, the rest of the ticket to Anywhere team wore casual shorts, flip-flops, and a red t-shirt with the company's logo on the breast pocket. "Do you have a great answer?" I asked. "He hasn't shown up yet," she said, a grin playing at the corner of her lips as she continued to assess my appearance. "You look like you've had an interesting night." "What? Me?" I asked, too innocently. "Me? No. Not at all. No." But when I shook my head, still more sand fell from my long, wind-tangled dark hair. Julie leaned down to brush some grains from the patent leather of her peep-toes. She grinned up at me. "You didn't come back to the room last night," she said. Gulp. "I went for a walk on the beach." She glanced at her nails as if checking them for imperfections. There weren't any. I got up early to work on a couple of idea pitches for the new boss, and your bed was empty and still made. My cheeks heated. I might have met someone on the beach, I whispered. Her eyes widened. Someone? I shook my head. Never mind. No one. She pointed a finger at me, grinning. You just said it was someone. I huffed. It was someone. Not someone. Just someone. Once again, her gaze fell over my wrinkled shirt from the night before, the bags that were surely under my eyes from no sleep, and my unbrushed and sandy hair. Was this someone cute? Julie. Was this someone tall? Look. Was this someone super duper dreamy? I was thankfully saved from absolutely dying of embarrassment when a hotel employee walked over to us from the long, white marble front desk. La or Anna, the woman said, pronouncing it Yorana. Good morning, Julie answered, with a smile. Are you the ticket to anywhere party? She asked, with a slight accent. Not much of a party, Gary, one of my co-workers grumbled from his chair, followed by a bored sigh. I scowled at him and turned to the woman. Yes, that's us. The woman gave me a quick nod. Yes, well, I just received a message for you all from a Mr. McKinney, if you don't mind, she said, clearing her throat as she pulled out a thick card of hotel stationery. It reads, as much as I was very much looking forward to meeting all of you today, I have unfortunately been delayed by something very unexpected. I am sorry to keep you waiting, but I will send word regarding where we will meet tomorrow. Till then. A collective groan went through the group as I took the note from her and looked it over as if it might offer more of a clue as to why our boss brought us all the way to Tahiti only to cancel on us due to something unexpected. Thank you, I said, giving the woman a smile. My pleasure, she said, giving a nod and then turning on her heel back towards the front desk. When I turned to the group, I saw them pushing themselves up from their lazy, reclined positions as if they were going to clear out. Wait, Julie said, uselessly trying to stop everyone as they passed by. Where are you guys going? You heard the lady, Gary answered, thumbing over toward the front desk. Boss ain't here. Time for a Mai Tai or 3 at the beach. But this is still a work trip, Julie protested, weakly. We should take advantage of. Her words trailed off into unsure silence as I saw her proud shoulders slump and her fingers start to fidget with her overstuffed binder of ideas I knew she'd worked so hard on. Speak up, Julie, I said, nudging her as our co-workers crossed the lobby toward the large patio with white stone stairs that descended to the beach. Don't let Gary of all people get you down. But Julie seemed to only shrink further inside the shell of her business suit, shaking her head. No, it's fine, she said meekly. I mean, they prefer to go to the beach and it's not like I'm their boss. I'm not in charge or anything. But you have good ideas, I insisted. And you should make them hear you. I tried to give her an encouraging smile, nodding toward the group who was almost out the doors, but she was mute as a mouse. I can't, she squeaked. I drummed my fingers against my thighs and then stepped forward, cupping my hands over my mouth and shouting obnoxiously across the lobby. Hey, guys! Gary! Tina! Alexandra! Hey! The group hesitated halfway out the door into the delicious sunshine and turned back toward the sound of my voice. What? Gary grumbled back. Is the boss coming? No, but... Well, then we're all off to Margaritaville. Julie's hand tugged at my arm. Really, Krista, thanks, but it's all right. I glanced at her quashed enthusiasm, at her book of ideas, her hours of work, and shook my head. No, you're going to be heard, Julie. Hey! Hold up! I shouted, my echoing voice stopping the group as they were heading outside. I frowned when Gary urged everyone to keep going. Don't think I won't go all the way down to the beach to get you, I shouted, drawing the confused attention of other vacationers in the resort lobby. What is it, Krista? Gary asked, with a whiny voice. I checked with Julie, who at my cue quickly flipped through her binder. I looked between her fast-moving fingers and the group. The troops are getting restless here, Jules, I murmured under my breath. Gary rolled his eyes and reached for the door to the patio. Now or never, Julie, I whispered. The spa, she exclaimed. The spa? I asked. The spa? Gary echoed. Julie nodded. The spa. I cupped my hands around my mouth. The spa! I shouted, in case there was any confusion what Julie had said. I received raised eyebrows and frowns from my coworkers. I turned to Julie for answers, and she was once again buzzing with energy as she flipped through a resort pamphlet. Yeah, we could go to the spa and each receive a different treatment, so we'll have comprehensive recommendations for our clients, she said, her voice back to its normal bubbly self. She grinned over at me. Productive and relaxing. I smiled. Well, tell them, Julie. It's a fantastic idea. And it's yours. Julie ducked her eyes sheepishly and dismissed me with a wave. You tell them, Krista. I don't mind. I mean, they listen to you. They'll listen to you, too. She laughed shyly. I'm not so sure. I was about to reassure her that she needed a bit of confidence, because she already had the drive, the smarts, and the ideas. She just needed the strength to use her voice. But before I could say any of that, Gary interrupted me. Hey, so what's going on? He called. 'Cause there's a daiquiri with my name on it under the cabana. I checked with Julie once more, but she had already withdrawn into the safety and security of her brochures and pamphlets and Excel spreadsheets. With a sigh, I relayed the information to the group, who all, even Gary, begrudgingly admitted that it was a pretty good idea. See? I whispered to Julie as the group came back toward us. You should have told them. Just like you should have told me about a certain someone, she said, winking at me before slipping past toward the spa. It was no one, I shouted after her. If you say so, she called back. It was no one, I muttered to myself as I followed after her and the rest of the group. Besides, even if he were a someone, it's not like I was ever going to see him again. Chapter 8. 3.5 hours after I realized I would never see Mason again, I emerged from my hot rock treatment in the spa pool area with muscles like warm jelly and spotted his muscular build, blonde hair and green eyes. My tummy did a little flip. Not good. My attempt to duck and hide behind a banana tree in the high glass atrium proved futile when his head turned my way. Krista? He asked. My eyes squeezed shut at the familiar voice I'd gotten to know so well last night, and my belly warmed at the intoxicating way my name sounded coming from his lips. Krista, is that you? He asked. I heard Mason's feet moving toward me and knew I only had a little bit of time to get my mind straight, to think reasonably, and to be practical. You're here on business, I whispered, reminding myself with a very pragmatic pep talk. You don't have time for romance. The night before was irresponsible. Krista? He asked, lifting one of the palms of the big, lush banana tree. What was that you were saying to me? Oh, Mason. Hi. I was just saying that there's a whole island around me and all I want to explore is your eyes? That we were only apart for a few hours and I already missed you? So much for practical. Yeah, better to keep my mouth shut on these thoughts. With great effort, I managed to not let the sugary sweet word slip from the tip of my tongue and instead cleared my throat and pointed to the palms. I was saying that these are, well, good hiding places, he supplied, with a mischievous grin. I scoffed indignantly and slipped past him. I wasn't hiding. He hurried after me. No? I attempted a laugh that came out like a croak. Of course not. His fingers brushed past mine, sending an electric skitter through my belly. You sure? He asked, with humor in his voice. Because it kind of seemed like you were hiding from me. I stopped and turned around to face him. In retrospect, it was a bad decision because it put me facing his tanned, chiseled ABS. I gulped and forced my eyes upward, not that the sparkle of his eyes was any easier to resist. Come out with me, he said, his smile pure warmth. My heart tugged at me to say yes. Sorry, can't. I turned on my heel and tried to escape from the hunkiest of temptations by slipping into the nearest pool. The resort spa had an expansive complex of both indoor and outdoor pools of varying purposes. There were personal soaking pools, a mud pool, a hot pool, a cold pool, a salt and mineral pool, and a fresh pool. The pools were surrounded with rocks and vegetation. The circular aquamarine pool I happened to slip into had a current flowing through it. It swept me along, but Mason followed quickly and it swept him along right beside me. Come out with me, he said, floating along beside me, wiggling his toes above the surface. This is a business trip, I said, trying and failing to swim backwards against the current. A business trip? He asked, floating so effortlessly that he managed to rest his hands behind his head. I work for a travel agency, I said, giving up trying to get away because the current was too strong and that smile was too appealing. So sorry, but I can't. When we'd completed the lap around the island abounding with jungle flowers, I padded to the steps and hurried out of the pool. I spotted a rather busy bubbling pool and hurried toward it, slipping between two hairy-chested old men. I grinned victoriously, because there was nowhere for Mason to sit. Instead of accepting defeat, Mason waded into the heated pool and stopped in front of me, content to just stand there. Huh. Come out with me, he said, crossing his arms over his broad, tan chest. Why couldn't I have run into him at a library? Or a dentist office? Or an IRS office? Nobody goes around shirtless there if they know what's good for them. Why the pool area of the spa? Realizing that we had the attention of the two hairy-chested men, I stood and went to get out of the pool only to stumble and fall into Mason's arms. Not the best move if my goal was to not fall for him. I sucked in a breath at the feel of his arms around me, the warmth of his chest against my skin. His sun-bleached hair fell over one eye as he smiled down at me. Does this mean yes? He asked. I forced a frown, even though it was incredibly difficult when he was smiling at me like that. Definitely not, I said. Hang on, Krista, he said. Can't, must go. I wiggled out of Mason's grip and made it successfully out of the pool. My feet slapped against the wet rock and I heard the echo of Mason's feet quick at my heels. I needed to find a way to slip away from him because what little resolve I had in the first place was rapidly disappearing. I tried to lose him in a large family laden with floaties and pool toys, towels and extra-large-sized bottles of sunscreen. Come out with me, he said, appearing in front of me and giving me an endearing side glance that made my legs turn liquid. Well, that attempt failed. The corners of my mouth twitched as I hurried by a large pool with a waterfall feature dotted with brightly colored tropical flowers near the back. Hoping to catch him off guard, I dived in and swam till I felt the cascades against my back. Coughing and pushing back my long, wet hair, I emerged into a small, rocky cove behind the waterfall only big enough for one. No, make that two people. Mason came up from beneath the warm, crystal-clear water and bobbed in the tight space next to me. Come out with me, he said, the corner of his mouth hitching up. I can see you smiling. The sunlight that sneaked through the cascades sparkled in his green eyes. Light seemed to dance everywhere around us in the intimate space, and even I couldn't deny it was magical. "I have to work," I said, my voice sounding weak and uncertain even to my own ears. "It's the responsible thing to do." He glanced toward the top of the falls. "You said you work for a travel agency, right?" I nodded, my arms treading water to keep me afloat. "What if I took you out to see a waterfall?" he asked, gesturing to the pool's waterfall which cascaded down with warm water. "You could show it to your agency maybe? They could recommend it to clients who come here on vacation? How about that?" I hesitated. I stretched my fingers into the plunging waters. "I'm already at a waterfall." "This?" he asked, laughing. "Any travel agency can recommend the pool, but only a special few would know firsthand how to recommend a real waterfall." "I don't know," I said, biting my lip. "It wouldn't be an adventure," he said, touching my arm for a quick second. "It won't be anything close to what you dream of doing. It'll just be for work." "Nothing scary about that." "Just for work," I repeated, fighting against my pragmatic side. I wasn't the best swimmer and I was starting to grow tired, my toes straining for the floor. Mason immediately noticed this. He swam closer and his hand, smooth as glass beneath the surface, moved to my waist to support me in the water. This brought him close enough that I could see the dark flecks on his green irises. My heart pounded in my chest. "Only if it's just for work," I whispered. His eyes held mine, sending shivers down my spine. He nodded. "Just for work." We were so close that I thought maybe we could hear each other's thoughts. And I was fairly certain it was the exact same thought. This was definitely not for work. Chapter 9. I wasn't sure if the screaming in my ear was from the whine of the ATV's motor as it struggled up a bumpy, uneven dirt road in the middle of a jungle or whether it was my actual screams because I was on an ATV on a bumpy, uneven dirt road in the middle of a jungle. Either way, my fingers tightened around Mason's t-shirt and I nestled my cheek closer against his broad, muscular back. "You all right back there?" he called back to me over the roar, giving my knee a brief, supportive squeeze. "Yes." I nodded, my eyes squeezing shut. I was imagining my apartment back in Sacramento. I was imagining my daily routine that I knew like the back of my hand. I was imagining my desk chair at Ticket to Anywhere that didn't even roll, let alone zoom and rattle and lurch and threaten to throw me off like a bucking bronco. I hated that chair, but I didn't fear it was going to kill me like Mason's ATV. "Just let me know when it's over," I shouted, shrieking as we hit a dip in the rough road. "Are your eyes closed?" he asked and I felt him turning his head. "You bet my eyes are closed," I replied emphatically. He slowed the ATV, but it was like slowing down a roller coaster on the descent. Just because you were falling more slowly didn't mean you weren't still plunging toward the earth. "Krista, open your eyes," he said, his voice surprisingly soft over the rumble of the engine. I shook my head, burying my face even more into Mason's t-shirt. "Nope, nope. No way. Absolutely not." "Come on," he said. "You're missing it." "I'm not Mr. World Adventurer, like you," I said, shaking my head as we came to a stop. "I'm Ms. Homebuddy, Ms. Play It Safe, Ms. Wild equals a Black Friday sale at Nordstrom." "I'm not brave like you." "I don't believe that," he said, before swinging his weight off the ATV, leaving me alone on the back seat. "Wait, what are you doing?" I asked, panic in my voice as I reached blindly for him. I yelped when his strong, warm hands wrapped around my waist, lifted me, and scooted me to the front of the ATV. Still managing to keep my eyes closed, I whipped my head around in confusion as he got back on, this time behind me. "No, I'm not driving," I said, pointing my hand in what I assumed was his general direction. "No way, No, how? He shifted as if to get comfortable and then said with what I knew was a casual grin on his lips, Krista, the sun is shining. The breeze is blowing. The birds are singing. I'm content to sit right here all day if you don't want to drive. And if I wait all day? I asked, somehow managing to narrow my eyes while they were still closed. Then we'll sleep beneath the stars. I crossed my arms. Are you seriously going to make me drive? I'm seriously not going to let you miss out on an opportunity of a lifetime, he countered. There's an incredible world around you, Krista. You just have to open your eyes. I bit my lip in hesitation. Because Sacramento and my daily routine and my uncomfortable, stiff desk chair were not here. I imagined instead a thick jungle with snakes and spiders and centipedes. I imagined an impossible maze of branches and leaves. I imagined getting lost in tangles of vines that inched closer and closer. Warm hands on my arms calmed my thoughts. One eye at a time, he said, his mouth close to my ear. I sucked in a steadying breath and peeked open one eye. We were on a path in the mountains, in a clearing between the trees. Emerald hills, lush and teeming with bursts of vibrant colors, swept down toward the glistening shore. The ocean extended in an aquamarine amber to a bright blue horizon, almost impossible to distinguish from the dazzling waters. I was speechless and I hadn't even noticed that I'd unconsciously opened the other eye. I turned to face Mason, who had been watching my reaction with a barely contained grin. Well, he asked, his thumbs brushing along my arms and sending goosebumps along my skin. My grin matched his. So, how do you drive this thing? We moved slowly through the rest of the path and I didn't close my eyes once, which was a good thing since, I was driving. Mason wiggled in close to me on the back of the ATV and rested his chin on my shoulder as he guided my hands to the brake and clutch. His mouth stayed close to my ear as he patiently coached me through the mechanics, his warmth like the sunlight that filtered down through the wide, green palms that shifted slightly in the breeze. I liked his arms around me. I liked his chest tight against my back. I liked feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat against me as brightly colored birds flitted across the path. It took us probably 3 or 4 times longer with me driving to get to the waterfall, but Mason didn't seem to mind. And I certainly didn't either. The falls fell from a rock face covered in green moss which extended high above the tree line. It crashed into a pool of turquoise water so clear that I could make out every smooth pebble at the bottom. The waterfall was like a hidden gem in the mountains, a secret, intimate place. It was only as I was tugging off my sneakers that I frowned in realization. There's no one here, I said, stating what should have been obvious from the second we arrived. He grinned before tugging off his black t-shirt and revealing his chiseled, tanned abs that made my belly flutter. I told you I'd show you a real waterfall, he said, giving me a mischievous smile before diving into the jewel-like waters. I stood at the edge of the pool as he popped back up, carting his fingers through his long hair. What are you doing? Explorations for your company, he said, smiling and squinting in the sunlight. This is business, right? I hesitated just as I was about to dip in a toe. My heart jolted. How easily I'd forgotten that this was supposed to be business. How easily I'd forgotten that I was still on this trip for ticket to anywhere. How easily I'd forgotten that I had yet to meet my new boss who I depended on for my job, my livelihood. How easily I got caught up in the warmth of Mason's skin. How easily I got caught up in the sunshine of his smile. How easily I got caught up in his world of exotic adventure. Right, I said, clearing my throat, all businesslike and professional. Of course. I glanced over my shoulder at my bag. My notebook was in there. I should grab it to take notes for the clients of Ticket to Anywhere. Biting my lip, I looked back at Mason, who watched me as he treaded water in the middle of the pool. I said slowly, moving toward the edge. Our customers will probably want to know the temperature of the water. He nodded. Most definitely. If I took a quick dip with you, it would be research when you really think about it, right? Can't argue with that, he said, flashing that signature grin, his skin golden in the sun. I pulled my shirt off, revealing my swimsuit, and tossed the shirt back by my bag. This is just business, I said, pointing a finger at him. He nodded, holding up a hand, like he was taking an oath. Business. I grinned. And then I dove in and swam into his waiting arms beneath the falls. Chapter 10. The next morning, it seemed that not even the sound of Gary getting sick over the side of the boat could dampen my good mood. I leaned back and smiled up at the sun with my eyes closed and my hands behind my head as the waves rocked us back and forth. Even just a day ago, I would have expected to be gripping the edge of my seat with terrified eyes, wearing 3 safety vests as extra protection should the boat suddenly capsize along the coast. But this morning, I was simply enjoying the trip. I was even humming. I flinched when a hand suddenly smacked against my forehead. I opened my eyes in startlement to find Julie with the back of her hand resting against my forehead as she frowned. You don't seem to have a fever, she said, her frown intensifying as she studied me. Why would you think I have a fever? I asked, swatting her hand away and nestling back into my comfy position in the sun. You're on a boat in the ocean and you aren't freaking out, Julie teased, with a laugh. You are still Krista Clarke, aren't you? I grinned. Haha, very funny. Sure, I was still Krista Clarke. But there was more to it now. I did feel a little different. A little braver. A little more adventurous. A little more accepting of the unknown. It wasn't a huge change. But it was enough to just feel. Like the first shoot of green emerging from the dirt that had been there, beneath the surface the whole time. But now it was in the sun and there was a world of possibilities as it grew into a flower. Julie and I watched Gary's face turn green again before he hurried to lean his head over the edge of the boat, and we both grimaced at the less than agreeable sounds. The whole Ticket to Anywhere team had ended up on a boat headed south along the coastline of Tahiti after an email we received early this morning that read, "Early bird gets the worm, team. I can't wait to see what you're made of today. Please report to the resort docks at 8 a.m. promptly where a boat will be waiting for you. We will be seeing each other soon, I promise. Rise and shine, it's adventure time. Mr. M." After a few moments, Gary lifted his head from the side of the boat only to slouch down with a discontented groan. Ugh, I really hope we're going to be meeting the new boss in some luxurious villa, he said, dragging a hand over his pale face. Something that's not moving and has long couches and staff who bring you bottomless mimosas. I hope we're going to be meeting him in a conference room, Julie said, with an excited smile. I brought my laptop, but I'll obviously need a projector for my PowerPoint presentation on how to engage our clients more effectively through social media. She held her briefcase closer to her side and straightened her suit jacket as the boat slowed and drifted toward the coast. Gary held his stomach. I'm fine with a conference room as long as there are mimosas. And maybe some antacids. Was it motion sickness or too many of his dequirus or whatever? Who knew? The whole team, minus Gary, shifted to the side of the boat closest to the tree-lined shore to catch the first view of where our new boss would be meeting us. Excited whispers circulated around the group. Maybe it's a mansion with a rooftop. Maybe it's a private beach with private cabanas for each of us. Maybe it's a yacht, a giant, $1 million, white yacht. But the excited whispers quickly shifted into confused, concerned protests as the driver eased the boat into what could only loosely be called a dock, which only consisted of a few unstable planks of wood. Canoes and smaller fishing boats bobbed in the water, tied with frayed rope. There was nothing on the beach except a dirt road leading into the trees. I think there is some mistake, Gary said, glancing at the captain as he hopped off. Even my brilliant, dazzling, can't-be-rained-on mood was shaken briefly by this strange turn of events. Are you sure this is correct? I asked. This is the spot, the captain insisted, holding out a hand to Julie to help her off the boat. If this is where the boss wants to meet us, then we shouldn't argue, Julie whispered back to me. I glanced over my shoulder. The team looked like the last thing in the world they wanted to do was step off the boat. And I kind of agreed with them. If you think this is a good idea, take charge and tell them, I whispered back. She studied their resolute faces. Would you mind? They listen to you so much better. I gave her a look that said flattery would not work on me. I'm not even sure I agree with you. Please? Pretty please with a soccer ball on top. I sighed. Last time, Julie. She nodded. You're the best, Krista. Come on, everyone, I said, waving them over. Surely our new boss knows what he's doing, I said, with more confidence than I felt. There's a beautiful world out here, Julie chimed in. I thought of what Mason would do in this situation. His green eyes would dance. The warmth of his touch would soothe me. He'd find an adventure here, for sure. He could turn anything into an adventure. Even a deserted island with a dirt road. Gulp. All we have to do is trust our new boss, I said, marching forward in an exaggerated way. Nobody laughed. Could I blame them? With much reluctance and with much grumbling from Gary, I managed to get everyone off the boat. Julie and I glanced at each other nervously, sinking deeper into the sand, and then the captain pulled the boat out and drove away. Now, we were alone. Very, very alone. I'm sure the boss will be here soon, I said, starting to feel more than a little nervous. I mean, he said in the note that he'd be here. But 45 minutes later, we were still alone. This is your fault, Krista, Gary said, with a long whine. We never should have gotten off that boat. We all knew it was a bad idea, but you assured us that's what we should do. He had a small point. We're not giving up now, are we? I asked, wishing I could call 911 or whatever the equivalent was in Tahiti. I fielded a few more complaints with promises of hope that I didn't believe, before Julie poked me. I turned to find her staring at the dirt road, her fingers tapping in thought against her briefcase. She was wobbling in her heels in the sand. Krista, she whispered. I don't think the new boss is coming. I laughed. Of course, he isn't. Need I point out that you said he was? Did he actually say that, though? Julie asked, turning to me. Early bird gets the worm, team. I can't wait to see what you're made of today. Please report to the resort docks at 8 a.m. promptly where a boat will be waiting for you. We will be seeing each other soon, I promise. Rise and shine, it's adventure time. Mr. M. Wait, did you memorize his note? I asked. Of course, I did, she said, dismissing that weird fact with a wave of her hand. But the important part is that he said, I can't wait to see what you're made of. Right? I crossed my arms over my chest. We are stranded in the middle of nowhere. How is his enthusiasm important right now? She grinned, excitement lighting her eyes. I think this is a test. And you've never led us astray before, or anything, I said, scratching my head. Actually, I'm sure it's a test, she repeated, looking toward the dirt road. I think our new boss wants us to get back to the resort by ourselves. Travel into the unknown in a foreign country? I asked, thinking that would be a very bad idea. We should just wait for the captain to return. Or maybe he'll alert the authorities of our whereabouts when someone comes looking for us. Would anybody be looking for us, though? I was starting to panic and would have preferred my fear-filled airplane flight right now, which had been a cinch compared to this. It's a brilliant idea, actually, she said. I couldn't disagree more. No, really, Krista, she said, gripping my arm. I think he wants us to really get to know the island, its geography, its people, and its local culture. I think he wanted to get us out of the resort bubble. I admire him so much already. Don't you? Not even a little bit. I turned to look at the dirt road as well, feeling unsure and apprehensive. We don't know where that road leads, Julie. Exactly, she said, her grin deepening. We don't know anything about Tahiti besides pool service and complimentary chocolates. That's not enough for a good travel agent, is it? Seems like enough to me, I said, considering her words. I looked over the Ticket to Anywhere group, who were lounging in the sand or seeking shade under the palm trees. Not exactly adventurers. I looked toward the dirt road again. There was no hint whatsoever of a car coming to rescue us, no cloud of dust, no rumble of tires. And it was true that the new boss never explicitly said he would be here to meet us. You may be right, I admitted. I know I'm right, she said, beaming triumphantly at having figured out this game plan that may or may not be the case. I mean, I wasn't ready to discard the notion that our flaky new boss was a total nut job. Finally, she nodded over my shoulder toward the group and added as she patted me on the shoulder. Now you tell them it's time to go. Oh, great. This should be fun. Chapter 11. Boy, did I need a shower. My hair was matted to the back of my sweaty neck, my clothes were practically glued to my body from the humidity, and I was covered in dirt and mud and leaves. Shockingly, I also wore a big, happy smile. As we entered the resort, we must have looked like quite the ragged group returning through the front gates of the luxury resort, sunburnt and laughing hysterically. We'd accepted an offer to ride in the back of a truck meant to carry goats. I might have cared about the stares we were getting from the very clean vacationers, who smelled of coconut and sea salt, but I was too busy wiping tears from my eyes as we joked with the village children who had caught a ride with us after the villager offered us a one-way ticket back to civilization. The day had been surprising in many ways, but none of them as shocking as how much fun I'd had. After much convincing, our group did indeed set off down the dirt road, except for Gary, that this was what our new boss had intended. After a whopping 2 hours of hiking, we'd found a small village where not a lick of English was spoken. Assuming that they wouldn't be able to help us, everyone felt defeated and wanted to go back to where we'd been dropped off. Surely the boss would pick us up there. Maybe he was already waiting for us on the beach with his giant, million-dollar white yacht. Yeah, people were either dreaming or hallucinating from the heat and water deprivation. However, Julie insisted, through me, of course, that we try to communicate with the villagers, and that a little bit of discomfort with communication was all right. It ended up being the right decision. The villagers were kind and accommodating, insisting that we see their homes, eat their food, and drink lots of water. After getting a taste of the culture of Tahiti, we loaded into a truck with some of the village children and were taken back to the resort. All of us, even grumpy Gary, waved goodbye until the truck disappeared along the coastal highway. After I got back to my hotel room, I turned on the shower and grinned at the memory of the day. I started to consider that maybe I'd like this new boss, whoever he was, and whenever I finally got to meet him. He did things differently. And maybe that could be a good thing. Maybe. I was just about to step into the much-needed shower when the phone in our room rang. I switched off the water and ran to pick up the receiver. Hello? You're still alive, huh? Jill. I grinned and plopped down on the bed, wincing at how dirty I was getting the sheets. And Michelle! Michelle shouted, forcing me to pull the receiver away from my ear with a giggle. "I'm so glad you two called," I said, happy to hear from my friends. "We're kind of surprised you're still there," Jill said, her tone teasing. "I kind of thought you might have booked an early ticket back." "Brooks and I thought you'd stick it out for the 2 weeks," Michelle said, her tone serious. "But we bet you'd barricade yourself in your hotel room, surviving off of the mini-bar chocolate and Chardonnay." "Well, you're both wrong," I said, grinning victoriously. "I've already been to a market in the capital city, to a waterfall in the mountains, and to a remote village in the jungle. Oh, and I drove an ATV." Jill and Michelle both gave shocked gasps. "Did we accidentally call Julie?" Jill joked. "I know, right?" I said, laughing. Come to think of it, I was surprised at all I'd done, too. And I hadn't even told them about diving into the ocean to help a handsome stranger who had amazing green eyes. I bit my lip and hesitated, wondering if I should tell them my secret. But, finally, the excitement about Mason bubbled up and I couldn't stop myself. "I kind of met someone," I said, my cheeks heating. "You did?" Michelle asked. "Details, please." I told them all about Mason and how we stayed up the entire night together, rolling my eyes at their jokes about me being up way past my bedtime. I told them about the ATV ride and the waterfall. I told them about how he made me feel like more than just a cautious, practical girl from Sacramento. I told them about his beautiful green eyes. I told them about how he held me beneath the waterfall. I told them about how I couldn't wait to see him again. "Wow, what a whirlwind," Jill said, with a surprised tone. "How does he kiss?" I bit my bottom lip. "Awesome. I assume." "You assume?" Michelle asked. "We haven't kissed," I admitted, but that didn't mean I hadn't imagined kissing him and what that would feel like. Shiver. No, no, no. I was here on a business trip and he was a jet-setter of the world. He was merely helping me with my work. That's all. "I can't believe I'm here curled against a porcelain toilet half the morning and you're on a beautiful island having a romance," Jill said. "It's not a romance," I assured her, clearly and calmly explaining that everything I did with Mason was business-related. Michelle snorted. "Yeah, related to the business of the heart." "Business of love," Jill added, both my friends laughing. They were crazy, obviously. My friends were insane. I mean, a relationship with Mason would be the very definition of impractical. He traveled, whereas I did the opposite of travel unless traveling from the couch to the fridge for another pint of ice cream qualified. And even when he wasn't traveling, the man lived in Florida. "I need to go take a shower," I said, daring a quick sniff under my arm and recoiling. "Like really need to go take a shower?" "You can't run away from your feelings," Jill said. "No matter how impractical they are, you can't escape them. Trust me, I know." "Live a little recklessly," Michelle encouraged. "Take a chance for once." I didn't have the heart to tell them that after my soccer career failure I was just done taking chances, making blind leaps, or hoping for more. Michelle chatted about her friend Carrie Smith from Blue Moon Bay who was coming to town to bid on a project. I hadn't met Carrie, but she owned some kind of cool store in her small beach town that carried a lot of handcrafted items because she's an artist. I told Michelle to wish her friend luck for me and to give my best to Brooks, her fiancé. Also, I asked Jill to give my best to Ryan, her husband. Wait, when had everyone stopped being single? At least Julie was single like me. Well, unless you counted the fact that she was married to her work and sleeping with her ideas binder. I went to the shower, struggling to fight back my growing feelings for Mason. I turned on the water and was about to take off my clothes to step in when I was once again interrupted, this time by a knock at the door. With a sigh, I turned off the water and went to the door. Maybe it was Julie with news about the elusive new boss? I opened the door and there was a sudden flurry of movement. Mason grabbed me, dipped me, and smiled down at my wide, surprised eyes. "I'm taking you on a date," he said. "What?" I asked, as he righted me and the world spun. Mason certainly had a way of making it do that. Mason's fingers interlaced with mine and he tugged me toward the elevators. "A date. You and me," he said. Wait, I have to take a shower." "A shower?" he asked, as if I were asking for something absolutely ridiculous. I laughed. "Yeah, you know it's where water falls over you and rinses away dirt and leaves and sweat." I gestured at my tangled hair, my dirty face, my rumpled clothes, and my mud-streaked legs. "I need a shower. Big time." He turned to fully face me and I blushed as his eyes trailed from my head to my toes. I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, which only made my blush deepen as grains of sand tumbled across my dirty toes. "I know," I said, ducking my gaze bashfully. "I'm a mess." He lifted my chin so my eyes met his. "You're beautiful." Normally, I would have shaken my head. Normally, I would have argued back. Normally, I would have said he was just being nice. But gazing at the warmth in his eyes and hearing the sincerity in his voice, I believed him. Maybe it was the way his eyes didn't flinch from mine, like he wanted to hold them as still as possible so he could see clearly into my soul. Wowzers. I let my hotel door fall shut behind me and he grinned. The shower would have to wait because it seemed that I was on another adventure. Chapter 12. Mason drove us in his blue Peugeot to a small beachside village just outside the resort where locals were gathering for a Polynesian festival called a Tamara. It was even busier than the market, which meant even more of the French language that I didn't understand. It was certainly outside my comfort zone. But when we got out of the car and Mason noticed me eyeing the festive gathering, he put his muscular arm around me and I found my comfort zone suddenly expanded. The tighter he held me, the braver I felt. The closer he pulled me and the further I felt I could step out into the unknown. There was something comforting and supportive about him that made me feel brave. "I hope you're hungry," he said, grinning down at me. "Starving." "Good." Mason and I walked through the festival together and he stopped every so often to point out this or that. He explained about the pig slowly roasting underground until it was about to fall off the bone tender. My stomach growled as we continued on. We stopped at a table where a man was slicing raw ahi tuna, which he gave us samples of along with coconut cream and lime after Mason spoke to him. I was about to shake my head and say that I don't like raw fish, but Mason's fingers were at my lips and the tuna was in my mouth before I knew it. A moment later, I was asking Mason how to request seconds. He laughed and then told me and I requested more with a fairly terrible accent. But, hey, I was attempting the language. Was that really bad? I asked, cheeks warming slightly as I licked my fingers. He squeezed me tight and shook his head. "No, you did great." We tried Hinano, a light golden Tahitian beer with pullet fafa, which was chicken and taro leaves simmered with coconut cream. We sampled Kato, which were coconut milk biscuits I could not get enough of. I even maintained my brave streak and gave chevrettes, or freshwater shrimp with curry, a go. Well, this isn't exactly samples at Costco on a Sunday afternoon, is it? I joked with him as live music started on a small stage on the beach. He laughed and shook his head. Tiki lamps staked into the ground were lit as the sun started to sink over the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold. Waves crashed on the shore and children shrieked as the foamy waters brushed over their feet as they ran away. Families gathered, laughing and hugging and sharing meals. We passed by a group of women who were mashing fruits in large bowls, chatting merrily amongst themselves. "They're making pie," he said, leaning close to my ear. "It's this kind of pudding and they use lots of fruits like mango and papaya and banana. You then add a coconut sauce on top. Sounds delicious." I watched the women as they worked and then turned to Mason. "Do you think we could help them?" His eyebrows rose. "You want to help?" "Yes, this is all so wonderful," I said, gesturing to the festival around us. "I'd like to be a part of it, maybe in a small way." "I get it." He smiled, glanced at the women and then turned to face me. "I'll tell you how to ask, okay?" I shook my head. "Can you just?" "You can do it," he said, shaking his head. "Why can't you?" I asked, suddenly feeling like Julie and how she'd never approach our coworkers with her thoughts. "This is how you ask," Mason said, bending over so we were eye to eye and then rambling off a string of incomprehensible words. I shook my head and went to turn away. "I can't," I said, my heart pounding in my chest and wishing I were at home in front of my TV watching a soccer game and in my comfort zone. "It's too much." Okay, he said, his voice calm, and he took my hands in his. "A little slower maybe?" I eyed him. "Puss," he said. I tried and he nodded. Good. Watch my lips." He definitely did not need to tell me twice. "Poussez-vous aider?" My tongue tripped over the words before getting to the end. He smiled patiently and lifted my hand to his face. He pressed my finger against his lips and I sucked in a breath. Any concentration I had after that was gone at the cushiony softness of his lips under my touch. I felt his lips moving as he repeated the question in French, tingles traveling up and down my spine. He watched me as I gave it another go. "Poussez-vous?" I held back a gasp when his finger found my lips. Brilliant colors of pink and orange and red and purple erupted in the sky above us as his thumb brushed tenderly across my mouth. "Vous," he said, his lips pursing. He guided my lips to do the same as I repeated the word. "Good," he said, his voice warm and thick as honey. He smiled and that's how my heart felt, warm and thick as honey. "Good. Poussez-vous aider?" I whispered and he nodded. "I knew you could do it," he said. He stepped back and with flustered, hot cheeks I stepped back too, remembering that we were at a festival and that there were a lot of people around, people who could see us. I scratched the back of my neck. I could still feel the searing heat of Mason's fingers on my lips. I wanted to touch them, to trace the outline of his fingertips, to follow the trail of his fingerprints. So should I try it then?" I asked, thumbing over my shoulder toward the table with the women who were still working. "Yeah," he said, his voice husky as if he were pulling himself out of the moment as well. "Yeah, yup, sure." We stood apart from each other, as if afraid to touch, as I went up and asked with surely a terrible accent and pronunciation if I could help them. The women assented with bright, cheerful smiles. Mason and I took some empty seats and started smashing the tropical fruits. I jolted when his knee bumped into mine beneath the table as we were working. I was about to mumble a quick apology, but one glance into his eyes told me it hadn't been an accident. He smiled and went back to his task, leaving me to stare at our touching knees. I considered it for a moment, fighting with the feelings my friends had warned I wouldn't be able to escape. And then I decided. I didn't move away. I thought maybe it was the bravest thing I did that entire day. Chapter 13. A large bonfire lit at the deep lavender sky as the sound of crashing waves mixed with the rhythmic thudding of drums and melodic singing as the villagers danced in large circles. Mason and I sat side by side in the sand, my head resting against his shoulder and his arm around my waist, holding me tight. The flames of the bonfire warmed my cheeks, the residual heat buried within the sand from the hot day warmed my bare toes. I smiled and sighed, nestling closer to him as I watched the last golden ray slip below the horizon of the ocean. I was the furthest I'd ever been outside my comfort zone, but the thought of getting up, loading back into the car, and driving back to the resort was already something I wasn't looking forward to. As Mason and I relaxed together, surrounded by the music and the laughter and the gentle soundtrack of a warm breeze through the palms, a woman came over to us and extended her hand as an opportunity to join the dance. Mason spoke in French, but I could tell from the shake of his head and the subtle flicker of disappointment on the woman's face that he declined. "I'll dance," I blurted. His forehead wrinkled as I wiggled from underneath his arm and pushed up from the sand. His hand brushed against mine. "Are you sure, Krista?" he asked, sounding as surprised as I felt that I'd agreed to dance a dance I didn't know in front of all these strangers. The woman took my hand and started to guide me toward the bonfire. "No, I'm not sure at all," I said, glancing back at him with a nervous laugh. "But I'm going to do it anyway." I hardly recognized my own voice. The Krista Clarke I knew was not the just do it anyway type. She was the dot every I and cross every T type. She was the double and triple check type, the let me sleep on it type. The woman smiled as she lifted a lei for me. I ducked my head so she could slip it on and I adjusted it as I looked back at Mason, who was staring at me with wide eyes, like he didn't recognize me either. And he'd just met me. I really don't know what I'm doing," I said, as the woman started showing me some of the steps as the drums pounded out the rhythm. She said something that my poor French skills translated as "just keep moving." So, I did just that. It was messy and I stumbled and tripped over myself more times than I got the step right, but I was out there. I was doing it. I expected a wave of embarrassment and self-consciousness to crash over me. My cheeks did grow warm, but I pretended it was from the bonfire and the dancing. My palms were sweaty, but I blamed the thick, humid night air sweet with blooming night flowers. I danced and tripped and bumped into people and confused my left with my right and spun the wrong direction and laughed and didn't get so caught up in the right step. I had fun. After a few songs my gaze drifted to the spot where Mason and I had sat together in the sand only to find it empty. Where had Mason gone? I felt a jolt of uneasiness as I scanned the crowd past the bonfire where people were eating and drinking amongst the flickering tiki lamps. My feet stilled when I failed to find him and I was just about to leave the dancers when I felt a hand slip around my waist. Mason spun me around and I stumbled against him, my palms flat against his strong, broad chest. I sucked in a breath at the way the flames illuminated his green eyes. A grin tugged up the corners of my lips. "I thought you didn't want to dance," I said. His expression was thoughtful and serious as he replied softly, "I tried as long as I could to stay away." His words sent goosebumps up and down my arms despite the thick, sweet humidity and the rhythmic waves of heat from the dancing bonfire. Mason swayed with me as we moved amongst the thronging, pulsing dancers, like two stones in a rushing, crashing river. The dancers' faces, their long dark hair, their twirling arms and their flashing smiles were a blur with only Mason's face in focus. "I told myself I was getting too close to you," he whispered, his expression vulnerable. "And that I would stay away while you danced. But you were so carefree, laughing and lost in the moment, and I knew I'd never seen anyone as beautiful." I sucked in a breath, not quite believing that this was happening. Perhaps it was a dream and I was asleep back at the resort. Or perhaps we hadn't even landed in Tahiti yet and I had managed a few minutes of sleep. Perhaps I imagined stumbling upon Mason on the beach that night. Perhaps I imagined staying awake the whole night with him like that, so irresponsible, so impractical, and so unlike myself. Perhaps there was no one holding me right now but a stiff, cramped airline chair. It seemed fitting that the impossible only happened in dreams. And yet Mason's hand at the small of my back felt warm like the sun that dazzled on the surface of the pool beneath the waterfall. The smell of his cologne mixed with salt and coconut and sweet mango. And the way he smiled as he looked down at me and brushed a strand of hair away from my face made my heart thud in my chest. "So, Krista Clarke," Mason said, looking into my eyes. "May I have this dance?" I didn't even hesitate. Chapter 14. A few days later, the Ticket to Anywhere team had made the short journey on the ferry to the neighboring island of Emoria for the second week of our trip to the French Polynesian Islands. I found Mason on the large white stone terrace overlooking the sparkling bay at the Apunohu Bay Luxury Resort. When I had told Mason of our itinerary, he'd agreed to come along as well. He told me he was ready for a change anyway, but part of me hoped the only reason had been me. But I barely dared to voice that thought in my own mind, let alone say it aloud. Mason rose when I approached, fidgeting with my white crochet dress and blushing slightly as he kissed my cheek in greeting. He moved to hold my chair out for me and I smoothed out my skirt as he crossed back to his seat. He'd reserved a table for us at the edge of the terrace, so all that stood between us and the promise of a stunning sunset over the ocean was a thin pane of clear glass. There was already a pitcher of sangria which caught the golden rays and dispersed them into tiny, magical rainbows like a prism. Mason poured me a glass as he smiled, and the taste was rich with brightly colored tropical fruits, fresh mint, and large refreshing pieces of ice. "How are you liking Emoria so far?" he asked, after the waiter came to take our order. I gestured around the resort, the expansive horizon, and the lush mountain peaks of Tahiti in the distance. "I mean, are there even words for a view this incredible?" I asked. He grinned. "So, you must understand my struggle at trying to capture all of this into words for my book," he said. I sipped my sangria and nodded. "The challenge is real." He glanced out at the rippling waters toward the faint pink stretching across the sky. "Sometimes I feel like I'll be chasing the right words my whole life," he said. I watched what seemed to be a bit of sadness cross his face before he shook his head, clearing his expression as if stepping into a warm cafe from a rainstorm. "How is work going?" he asked. I huffed and slouched in my chair. "More like how is work not going," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean the business part of the trip hasn't really even started," I said, still unable to believe the weirdness of this work trip. "Our new boss is still completely MIA. As we drank our sangria and watched the brightening sunset, I told Mason about how each morning the Ticket to Anywhere team would gather and each time the new boss would have some strange excuse for not showing up. One morning, we were supposed to take a hike up to meet him and we got to the top only to realize that there had been two paths and we'd taken the wrong one. He nodded over the lip of his glass of sangria. "And how was the path that you took by mistake?" "Well, it was stunning," I said, remembering back to Julie's excitement. "We were even told that almost no one ever took the path we'd chosen because it was less known. But that it was far superior to the other one." He shrugged, a little flash of laughter going through those green eyes. "A stunning hike sounds like something to be happy about." "But that's not the point," I said, telling him about how our team swam with stingrays only to find out the boss wasn't coming because he was afraid of them. "Do you think the team would have swum with them if they had known the boss wasn't coming?" he asked. "Not likely." I laughed, remembering that afternoon and Gary's frightened shrieks and Julie's wasted reassurances. The sky was now a canvas of only the brightest and most brilliant shades of pink and orange and red. Gary certainly wouldn't have. That's for sure. "Well, there you go." I shook my head and repeated, "But that's not the point." "What is the point of life?" he asked, shrugging and lifting his sangria as I finished telling him about all the ways the new boss had squirmed out of meeting with us and everything the team had braved through because of his promises. "Let me tell you about yesterday," I said, as Mason refilled my glass. We spent the whole day helping villagers get a pickup truck out of the ditch. I was so sweaty by the end of it. Our meals of freshly caught blue marlin arrived, and we were so absorbed in the succulent, delicate flavors for a time that words simply weren't possible. As the tiki lights began to flicker on, Mason cleared his throat. Sounds like you all have been developing quite a strong sense of teamwork. I guess, I said, thinking about his words as I raised a fork to my lips. Then I drummed my fingers on the edge of the table as the sky turned a soft shade of lavender and the waters deep into an indigo. But we were supposed to meet the new boss. Mason kept his eyes on his plate. Maybe this new boss has a reason for doing everything he's doing, even the being absent part. I doubt it, I said, taking another bite of my delicious food. It seems too irresponsible to me. He has a job to do as a leader. He's flaky, and that's that. That's that? Mason echoed. I nodded. There's nothing more? He pressed, gently. I considered his question and remained silent. Responsibilities are important, yes, he said. But what about chasing your dreams? Surely there has to be some room for that too? It's a business trip, I pointed out, logically. There's nothing dream-oriented about it. My mind drifted to my failed soccer career, my distant dream like a faint sketch where there had once been a vibrant oil painting. I'd left my dream behind. I'd thought it was the right way, the only way, but I'd failed and that was over. Mason must have seen the turmoil on my face because he reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Just something to think about, he said, his hand comforting around mine. Thanks, I know you have good intentions, I said, my thoughts still occupied. Had I been throwing away new dreams when I should have been painting them? Painting a new dream boldly and bravely, like painting with the colors of the sunset itself? Wasn't it too late to start again? Or maybe it was the only thing left to do. Chapter 15. No one on the Ticket to Anywhere team was surprised the next morning when we arrived at the new boss's desired location only to find he wasn't there. We were at a local dog shelter and the manager of the shelter came over to inform us that the new boss had been here, but unfortunately had to leave as he was allergic to dogs. Gary threw up his hands in frustration. He just figured that out now? When we're off the resort again because of his instructions? Well, we're here, Julie said, leaning toward me with a whisper. We may as well try to figure out why the new boss wanted us at this location. Just then a scraggly puppy licked Gary's big toe and a smile spread across his face as if that puppy had melted even the grumpiest of hearts. Turns out I didn't have to do much convincing to get the team to stay and volunteer once we were surrounded by the adorable, yelping pups. We were happy to help these abandoned pooches. Throughout the morning, our team worked together to wash, feed, exercise, and brush dozens of dogs, while learning about the serious issue of stray, homeless dogs on the island. It was an issue that many of us were unaware of and certainly wouldn't have known about if it hadn't been for this never-ending wild goose chase after our mysteriously absent boss. As the team speculated about this mystery man with theories ranging from he's not even on the island because he didn't want to bother flying to he's got a mansion on the mountain where he's sipping margaritas, I thought about what Mason had said over dinner last night. Maybe he was onto something, that this trip was about more than just meeting the new boss. All of us had learned so much about French Polynesia and our eyes had been open to what the islands had to offer besides poolside service. We'd also grown closer than ever as a team. After a few more hours of work, the vans from the resort arrived to drive us back. Everyone was loading up after a few more parting kisses to the pups, but I hesitated. Julie stopped and looked over her shoulder at me. She was still sticking to her business-like uniform, which was now covered in dog hair, despite knowing, just like the rest of us, that the chances of actually meeting the new boss in French Polynesia were slim. "You coming?" she asked. "I don't know," I said, scratching the head of a black and white speckled dog who panted with his tongue out next to me. I think I might keep working for a bit. Julie raised her eyebrows. You sure? I glanced back at the shelter. There was so much work to do and they were understaffed with all the dogs they had running around. I looked back at Julie and nodded. Yeah, I said, taking a step back. I'm going to stay for a bit. I'll call the resort when I'm ready. She ran back to give me a quick hug goodbye. But before she pulled away, she squeezed me tightly and whispered into my ear, "Whatever this change is in you, I like it." She ran toward the van as Gary shouted at her to hurry because he needed a drink. The van kicked up dirt down the road and I watched for a minute before returning to the shelter. I worked hard at whatever the manager needed and completely lost track of time. It was fulfilling, hard, good work, and who knows how long I would have kept working if I hadn't looked up from the hose where I was cleaning a particularly rambunctious puppy to see Mason walking toward me from his parked blue Peugeot. Shoot, I said, checking my watch. I was supposed to meet Mason for a walk along the beach 2 hours ago. Mason, I'm so sorry, I said, cringing as he ambled over to me. We were volunteering here and I just wanted to stay for a little while, and then I guess a little will turn into a lot of while and... Krista, Mason said, laughing and placing a hand on my arm. Please, please don't apologize. Mason rubbed the puppy I just washed behind the ear. I think it's wonderful that you wanted to spend your time this way, he said. It shows a lot of dedication. Thanks for understanding. I pushed my damp, sweaty hair out of my face with the back of my hand. Honestly, I haven't felt this proud of my work for a long while, I said, realizing how true this statement was. Mason waited as I turned off the water from the spigot. I like feeling like I'm doing something good, you know? It feels good to make a difference in these dogs' lives. Just then the puppy reared back and shook his long fur from his head all the way to the very tip of his toe, spraying Mason and me with sudsy water. I laughed, holding my hands out in a futile attempt to block the spray. The puppy then jogged away with its tail wagging, leaving Mason and me wet and staring at one another. We burst out laughing at the same time, and then Mason nodded toward the shelter doors. Let's get dried off, he said. As we went inside, I told Mason about my volunteer work at Founding Friendships and how much satisfaction I got from it. I looked around for a towel and saw Mason pick one up. Let me, he said, taking a step toward me as my heart rate kicked up. I stared up at him as he gently toweled off my hair and wiped the beads of water from my cheeks. I like that you care, he said, softly. I'm constantly finding new ways to be impressed by you, Krista Clarke. That's sweet, my voice trailed off and my breath caught in my throat at the look he was giving me. He wrapped the towel around my neck and used the two ends to pull me slightly closer to him. We were so close I thought he might kiss me. I wanted him to kiss me, so I stared up into his eyes and could feel my heart pounding. But just as Mason lowered his face toward mine, he quickly stepped back, hit his nose in the crook of his arm and sneezed. He sneezed once. Then twice. Then a third time. When he turned back to me, his eyes were red and puffy. He sniffled and I winced. Mason, I think you might be allergic to dogs. Let's get back to the resort. The moment was gone and I felt a little rush of disappointment. But then he slipped his arm around me and a warm feeling filled my chest as we walked back to his tiny car. Chapter 16. When Julie emailed a reminder to the team that it was our second to last night in Emoria, reality hit me that I would be leaving soon, that a plane would be waiting at the airport and I would be on it, that I would get back to life as usual, a life without Mason. My heart twisted with apprehension and the first traces of heartbreak as I left my hotel room, but all it took was one smile from Mason, who was waiting for me at the base of the stairs in the lobby, for those fears to fade away. Maybe I was just delaying the inevitable, but for the time being I would live in the moment. Mason and I followed the shore along the Punahou Bay and continued past the boundaries of the resorts. The crowds of tourists dissipated until we were walking in the dancing shadows of the palms with the crystal-clear waters rushing merrily around our bare feet. Heaven. We found a private cove where the sun sparkled on the surface of the water as if covered with diamonds, and Mason laid out a picnic blanket. With the soundtrack of waves and birds and waving palms around us, we unpacked the fresh fruit he had picked up from the market: mangoes, papayas, pineapple, apricots, and blackberries. I was settling onto the blanket in the sand when Mason pulled out 2 long stem glasses and then frowned. "Shoot," he said. I blocked the late afternoon sun with my hand to squint up at him. "What is it?" "I forgot the champagne." I glanced at the empty glasses. "Oh, well, that's okay." He shook his head. "No, we're celebrating. I'll run back and grab it real quick." I smiled as he planted a kiss on my forehead and started back toward the resort, sprinting across the sand. "Wait, what are we celebrating?" I called after him. He turned to jog backwards, grinning. "Meeting each other, of course." "A good reason," I said, settling against the blanket and closing my eyes against the delicious warmth of the sun. The rhythmic rocking of the waves made me feel like I was in a hammock, and I nearly dozed off until a piece of paper smacked me in the face. I peeked and I opened to see several more pages tugged by the wind from Mason's open backpack. "Not again!" I cried, as I hurried to snatch up the papers, shove them in the backpack and zip it up again. That guy was always living in the moment, but couldn't manage to secure his work. It was kind of adorable. I picked up some more papers, tidying the stack of runaway pages and deciding to playfully chastise Mason for always leaving his backpack open. Then I glanced at a few lines from his book and, before I knew it, I was engrossed in his writing. I knew I shouldn't have read the pages without permission, but they were right there in front of me. Then I came across a personal secret and my cheeks heated just as Mason came back, but grinning with a bottle of champagne. His eyes moved from my searing hot cheeks to the papers in my hand. "Mason, I'm sorry, but you left your backpack open and I..." He sank down next to me, gently taking the pages. "You took this out of my bag?" "No, the bag was open and they scattered in the breeze," I said, feeling guilty even though there was no hint of displeasure in his tone. It was so impolite to read them, but they were right there in front of me, and... He stuffed the pages into his backpack, making sure to zip it back up, and then placed a hand over mine. "I planned to show you today anyway," he said. I shook my head. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not comfortable sharing, and..." "I want to share this with you," he said, running his thumb across my cheek and giving me a soft smile. He then poured us each a glass of champagne and I chewed at my bottom lip. "I have a hard time talking about him," he said, clearing his throat. "My dad was my hero. I loved him more than I can say. He was the reason I developed a passion for traveling." I squeezed his hand. "Oh, Mason." He stared out at the endless ocean and told me about how his dad took him on trips, always sure to show him as much of the real culture of a country as possible. My eyes watered as he shared happy memories they had shared. He told me all kinds of wonderful stories and I could feel the love he had for his father. Then he sighed, dropped his head to his chest and played with the grains of sands in front of him. "The last few years have been hard on me since he passed away," he said, a line forming between his eyebrows. "Harder than I could have imagined." I waited patiently until he was ready to continue. "And it doesn't make things any better feeling like I'm letting down my mom," he said, his jaw muscles tightening. "I haven't been there for her much, because of my travels and writing this book. But I feel like I need to write it for him." Normally, I would just remain silent when someone opened up to me like this. I wasn't one to stick my nose where it didn't belong. And I wasn't exactly known for being bold. But I found myself wanting to help, even if the truth hurt a little. "Do you think traveling could be a way of avoiding the pain?" I asked, looking into those wide green eyes. Maybe you're out there focused on this book, thinking it will give you peace instead of facing your own story? His eyes turned glassy. But what happens if I stop? After a moment, he turned his attention to the ocean and I inched my hand toward his on the blanket and then hooked my pinky in his. At first, he didn't seem to notice, but after a few moments I felt his pinky tighten around mine. Then I shifted closer and wrapped my arms around him and urged his head against my shoulder. I held him tightly there on the beach. You'll just have to find something to anchor you, I whispered. I didn't dare to say that I hoped that anchor might be me. Chapter 17. It had gotten to the point that the Ticket to Anywhere gang started making bets about what clever excuse the new boss would have for dodging us. But the morning of our last full day in Emoria before we flew back home seemed pretty straightforward. We were simply to meet the new boss in the conference room of the Apunohu Bay Luxury Resorts. It's obvious that he's been back in Sacramento this whole time, Gary said, popping a grape into his mouth that he'd taken from the breakfast spread set up at the end of the room. After 2 weeks, there's no way he's suddenly showing up for a PowerPoint presentation. I was hardly listening as they went on to guess how long we'd wait before a resort staff person came in with an email or telegraph or carrier pigeon. I was staring out the large floor-to-ceiling windows at the mountain range of Emoria. I was imagining Mason hiking through those trails once I was back in Sacramento. I wondered where he would go next after he had enough adventures on Emoria. I wondered if he would think of me in Istanbul, Seoul, Oslo, or whether I'd just become a line or two in his book. The thought made me sad. I was dragged out of my thoughts by a hand on my knee. Julie was leaning forward to meet my eye and frowning slightly in concern. "You've been quiet this morning," she said. "Just tired." I leaned back in the conference chair to drag my hands through my hair with a yawn. I didn't sleep well. Like any good friend, she didn't let me escape that easily. "Why not?" she prodded. I nodded toward her binder. "Shouldn't you be prepping for when the new boss arrives?" I asked, trying for the easy distraction. "Come on, even I know he's not showing up," she said, rolling her eyes. "And besides, you're more important." I smiled at my sweet friend. "I'm fine." "Spill," she prompted. "Perhaps this has something to do with the not someone you met on the beach that first night?" I averted my eyes. "The not someone you've been going out to meet almost every day, perhaps?" "Not every day," I said, wishing it had been every day. But as I thought back on it, I remembered the days without Mason and the feeling of excitement and anticipation if I would see him again. And as I thought back even further, I tried to remember my life without Mason. Somehow, he'd become a presence in my life, as real as any friend I'd ever had, but, of course, I didn't want to kiss my friends. Could it be this not someone who has kept you smiling and staring dreamily out the window? "It's a beautiful view," I pointed out. She said, but clearly did not believe me for a second. "It is," I insisted. "You know, Krista," she said, drumming her fingers along the edge of her binder. "This whole trip, you've been pushing me to be brave, to speak up for myself with the group, and to take a risk for something I believe in. Well, if it's something you feel strongly about, I think you should go for it," I said. She leaned forward and placed a hand on my knee. "Maybe you could use a little bit of your own advice with this not someone. I opened my mouth, wanting to argue that was different. I wanted to argue that telling Mason how I felt about him was much scarier. I wanted to argue that daring to dream of a life of adventure with him was simply too big of a risk, too impractical. But I couldn't because my friend was right. Since I'd arrived, I had stayed up all night on the beach, explored a bustling foreign capital city, driven an ATV, swam beneath a waterfall and danced in front of fires. I'd proven that I was brave. So why shouldn't I be brave about what I truly wanted? Why should I not be brave and be honest about my feelings toward Mason? You're right, I said, with a growing flame of strength in my heart. I'm going to find him first thing after this meeting. I don't care if I miss the shuttle to the airport to find him. I'll search the whole resort, the whole island if need be. But I'll find him and take the biggest, most impractical risk of all. I'll tell him there must be a way to make it work between us. I'm proud of you, Julie said, giving me a warm smile. Just then, the door to the conference room opened and Mason himself walked in wearing a pale gray suit. He straightened his tie as everyone turned to stare at him. Hello, everyone, he said, as my eyes widened and my heart raced. He nodded. It's time we finally meet. My jaw dropped and my heart fell to my stomach. Mason McKinney, the guy I'd fallen for and was ready to open my heart to, was my new boss? A sinking feeling crept over my shoulders and down my arms. I'd told him I worked for a travel agency. I'd told him about my adventures. And this whole time he'd never said a word to me. Chapter 18. I'm Mason McKinney, he said, as I continued to stare at him, my stomach tying in a knot. And I'm your new boss. Well, sort of. He stood at the front of the conference table with his hands casually in his pockets, wearing an easy smile as his gaze moved from person to person. I sucked in a breath when his green eyes lingered on mine amongst the excited whispers of my coworkers. As he began introducing himself, I barely heard him over the blood rushing in my ears. I gripped the arms of my chair, but my mind was the opposite of frozen. Thoughts whirled and whipped and twisted in my brain with as much chaos as a tropical storm. I struggled to understand what was happening. I couldn't reconcile that the man standing in front of our group was the man I'd spent the last 2 weeks with. It seemed impossible. But slowly the pieces started to fall into place. Andrea was remarrying. Mason's father had traveled extensively. Andrea and Mason's father had started Ticket to Anywhere together, which she was now leaving in the hands of her capable son. Mason hadn't come home to Sacramento since his father's death, which is why we'd never met him. It all fit. Every single piece. Except the one where Mason knew this whole time and decided not to tell me, decided not to be honest with me, and decided to keep a part of his heart withheld from me. I know these last 2 weeks have been maybe a little peculiar, he said, and the room erupted in laughter. But I promise there was a method to the madness. I wrung my hands in my lap, because they were shaking so much. My role at Ticket to Anywhere will be an oversight position, he explained, but none of that mystery mattered to me anymore. And I wanted one of you to take over the day-to-day leadership of the company, which is why I've left you to your own devices. Everyone turned to one another with expectant smiles, murmuring with speculations about who he would choose to manage the agency. But my eyes were fixed on him, wide and unblinking. He grinned at me and winked, but I couldn't return his smile. You probably think I've been absent this whole time, but that's not true, he said, as if revealing a secret. I've been keeping an eye on all of you to learn for myself who displayed the qualities I value in a leader: leadership, resilience, strength, creative thinking, motivation, and kindness. And I'm happy to say that one person displayed all of these qualities and more. The room fell silent as Mason smiled. So, without further ado, please join me in congratulating your new boss, he said, pausing for a moment before his eyes fell on me. Krista Clarke. My body went numb as my coworkers clapped and cheered. Julie turned toward me. Congratulations, Krista. But I couldn't smile. I couldn't look my friend in the eye. I couldn't stay in the room. I'm sorry, I said, pushing back my chair and hurrying out of the conference room with my head ducked. I can't do this. Before the door could click shut behind me, I heard someone slip out. I heard the scuttle of feet hurrying after me. But I didn't stop until a hand touched my arm. We were out on the patio now, my heart pounding as I squinted in the dazzling morning rays. "Krista, wait," Mason said, bending down so he could look me in the eye. I averted my gaze, unable to look at him. "Please leave," I said. "Wait, listen," he said, reaching for my hands. I pulled my hands away. "You didn't say a thing this entire time." "I wanted to tell you," he said, his tone earnest. "Of course, I did. But that would have given you an unfair advantage over the others if you knew the entire reason I was here." "You lied to me," I said, my voice strained. "No," he insisted. "I never lied. I opened up to you," I said. "I opened up to you and trusted you." "Krista, I never betrayed that trust," he whispered, lifting my chin with his thumb. "I would never betray that trust. Please believe me." He reached for my hands, and this time I let his long, warm, calloused fingers intertwine with mine. I lifted my gaze, but my heart clenched at what I saw. The green of his irises was the green the first remembered, the green of sprawling jungles, the green of mangoes dripping with sweet nectar, the green of a new world, a world I dared to dream about. "I wouldn't lie to you, Krista." I found that I believed him. And yet something else tugged painfully at my heart, something that scared me as much as his hiding his true identity from me. Bracing myself to ask, I ducked my chin. "Why aren't you going to be the boss of Ticket to Anywhere?" He started to open his mouth but then hesitated. "Mason?" With a quivering sigh, he shook his head. "I plan to continue my travels," he said. "So, that dream I dared to imagine would die with the rising sun. Tomorrow, I'd wake up in my regular bed, in my regular life, in my regular routine." Mason obviously never saw this as a chance at forever like I had. I managed a nod as the tears threatened. "I get it," I said, pulling my hands from his. I ran, and this time Mason didn't follow. Chapter 19. On Monday morning, I walked into the nicest office in the building, which had my name on the door. This was the corner office with tall windows that let the sunlight in and overlooked the park behind us. The office was decorated with new furniture, polished and comfortable. It was everything I should have wanted in a promotion, and yet I stood in the center of the large, spacious room and felt empty. Upon returning to the States, Mason had sent an email with my formal offer letter. I needed to let him know what I'd decided. Really, there was no reason not to take the position since it came with a significantly higher paycheck and bonus option, very practical to say the least. Instead, I stood there, unable to decide, and even worse, feeling alone and hollow. I needed to clear my head, so I went outside and crossed the street to the quaint, leafy park where Courtney Carmichael had set up her eclectic coffee cart decorated as a tiki hut. Her Hawaiian shirt dazzled me with sequined sea turtles as I came up to her with a weak smile. "Just a black coffee today, Courtney," I said. "Oh, my, something's wrong." She poured my drink and passed it across the counter, which was decorated with coconuts and fresh, brightly colored flowers. "Just being practical," I said, taking a sip of the rich, dark liquid. "I heard about the big promotion," she said. "I figured you would be celebrating with something a little stronger than a black coffee." "I haven't officially accepted the position yet," I said, squinting against the morning sun as I sipped my drink. "Though I guess I will." She frowned, placing a temporarily closed sign on her coffee cart. "My friend, if I'm being honest with you, it sounds like you're talking about getting a tooth pulled instead of accepting a big promotion," she said, opening her fridge. "I'm fine," I said, unable to muster enthusiasm or a smile. "Right." She pulled out a bottle of whipped cream and, before I could protest, she squirted a towering mountain into my cup. She didn't put the whipped cream back into the fridge, but instead placed it next to me. It's the strongest thing I've got, and it looks like you need it. Unable to resist, I eyed the swirl of glistening white and then took a big lick, not caring that it smeared all over my lips and face. Oh, yum. But, still, it didn't lift my spirits. Accepting the promotion is the practical thing to do, I told Courtney as she listened intently. It comes with a big pay bump. I could pay off some old college loans, add to my savings account, and finally start an IRA. Those are important things, Courtney said, nodding. But they're not always the most important things. What does your heart tell you to do? This decision isn't about what my heart wants, I said, with a small chuckle. Of course, it wasn't about how I felt, sad, empty, heartbroken. The decision should be based on what my bank account says. You sound so much like how I was at 30, Courtney said, laughing. Working hard, making lots of money and living a miserable existence. I flinched. Ugh. Yeah, ugh, she said, leaning toward me. Are you passionate about this new job, Krista? No, I said, immediately. She tilted her head. Are you excited about it? I drummed my fingers against my coffee cup. Not really. Will you feel fulfilled in this position? That one was easy. No. You know what you need to do, my friend, she said, topping off my whipped cream. What kind of life will you have without listening to your heart? I comforted myself with another lick of whipped cream and sighed. And if I'm too afraid to do that? The heartbreak over not making the cut for professional soccer wrapped around my heart and squeezed like a vice. I remembered the dream of playing the game I loved being ripped from me and kicking me in the gut for good measure. I remembered the hollow feeling in my chest when it all slipped away like grains of sand through my fingers. I remembered deciding it would be safe not to dream anymore. Mason had changed all that, with his infectious smile and warm green eyes. But that adventure had ended no differently than my dream of playing professional soccer: pain, disappointment, emptiness. I sucked in a breath. What is the point of listening to your heart if it's only going to break in two time and time again? I asked. Tell me something, Krista, she said, pausing to stare at me thoughtfully for a quiet minute. Why do you volunteer so much of your time with founding friendships? I don't know, I said, my forehead wrinkling. I guess because it seems like the obvious thing to do, to help people. Because you believe a better life is possible for them? She asked. I nodded. Yes, of course. You want to fight for their chance at a brighter, happier, more fulfilled life with opportunities and security and joy and meaning and love? Courtney asked. Her words hit me like the waves upon the shores of Tahiti, one right after the other, relentless and powerful. Yes, I said in a hushed tone. Everyone deserves the chance. One chance? Or maybe taking more than one? She asked, starting to tidy her workstation, leaving me to my own realizations. Then she eyed me subtly. So, you don't volunteer there because it's the practical decision? No, I guess not. Do you feel fulfilled when you're there? And after you leave? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Actually, yes, I said, contemplatively licking my whipped cream. If you can help others with a second chance, then why not for yourself as well? She asked, as all of the pieces clicked into place. A warm feeling filled my chest. I knew what I needed to do. Courtney, I'm sorry, I said, taking a step back. But I have to go. Good luck, Courtney said, smiling. Thanks, I replied, noting she had already replaced her closed sign with one stating open for business. I wiped the whipped cream off my face with the back of my palm and grabbed my cell phone from my purse as I hurried away. I dialed Jill's number and waited impatiently as I tapped my toe against the curb. Krista? Hey, Jill, I said, my heart beating wildly. I need to talk to you about. Hang on, can this wait? She asked, her voice a little strained. No, Jill, it's super important, I said, feeling a rush of excitement. Really, Krista, are you sure it can't wait? I was near the point of bursting with enthusiasm. Jill, it really can't wait. I have the best idea, Anne. Hang on, Krista, she shouted, which was completely unlike her. Jill? You okay? Well, yes and no, my water just broke. This baby is coming. Chapter 20. Oh, Jill, she's beautiful, I said, sitting in the chair beside Jill's hospital bed later that day. She is, isn't she? Jill smiled at the small bundle in pink, who was resting peacefully on her chest. I reached over and brushed my thumb over that little button nose, smiling as she yawned and nestled closer to her mama. Have you decided on a name? I asked. Not yet, she said, and then added with a laugh. Ryan and I barely managed to agree on what color to paint the nursery. Two lawyers with their own opinions and endless facts to back up why we're right. It's not a pretty debate. I chuckled and leaned back in the chair. The late afternoon sun was filtering through the blinds and the new mother and daughter looked beautiful in the gentle light. You said there was something important you wanted to talk to me about, she asked softly, turning to look at me. It can wait, I insisted, shaking my head. You have something more pressing to think about right now. I think she'll sleep for a while, she said, dreaming of law school. I chuckled. Law school? Or medical school? I'm not picky. She shrugged. And I think I can manage to stay awake myself for a few minutes until Ryan gets back with his coffee. Well, I called about founding friendships, I said. She sighed and stared up at the ceiling of the hospital room. I don't know how it's possible to feel completely happy and completely guilty at the same time, but I'm managing to do it. What do you mean? I asked. I feel like I've neglected one baby for another. That's the thing, Jill, I said, scooting to the edge of my chair. I may have a solution. She raised an eyebrow. I'm all ears. You know I love founding friendships, I said, biting my bottom lip. The work I do there means the world to me. I'm passionate about volunteering there, so why shouldn't I do more? Why not commit all the way? Why not make it my life? She tilted her head. Maybe I'm tired from pushing a little human into the world, but I don't understand what you're saying. Hire me, I said, laying my heart on the line and feeling fully and completely vulnerable. Hire me to take over the work you've been doing. You can focus on your new baby and you won't have guilt because you'll trust that founding friendships is in good hands. She bit her lip. You would be interested in a full-time job? Yes, I said, my fingers tingling with how badly I wanted this. I don't know if I can pay what you're making with your promotion at Ticket to Anywhere, she said, her forehead tightening as the wheels in her head started turning. I'll have to run the numbers, but it might come down to a demotion. Normally this would have scared me. My mind would have gone wild worrying about savings and retirement. I'd get twisted up in the practicality of it all. I'll make it work, I told her. Whatever you can pay me, I'll make it work. She hesitated. Are you sure? I nodded emphatically. I'm positive. Then yes, she said, breaking out into a wild, happy smile. You're hired. I almost cheered before I remembered the soundly sleeping baby. Jill certainly wouldn't have a lot of these quiet moments in the near future, so I whispered a quiet, yay. The door to the room opened, and Jill's husband, Ryan, slipped into the room with a cup of coffee and a bag of takeout. "Thanks for staying while I ran out, Krista," he said. "My pleasure. I'll let you two enjoy this little one," I said, leaning to press a kiss to the baby's forehead. "We'll figure out the details when you're ready, Jill." "Thank you," she said. I smiled. "Thank you." Before I left the hospital room, I glanced back at Jill and Ryan and their new baby girl. Ryan squeezed into the hospital bed beside his wife, slipping his arm around her shoulders. Together, they looked down at the small bundle with such overwhelming love that it made my heart ache. I realized I wanted that kind of love that was so powerful it almost hurt. I went into the hallway and knew this was the kind of love where you had to take a risk. It wasn't a practical love, a rational love, or even a logical love. It was the love of dreams, of taking a leap and trusting someone's strong arms would be there to catch you. And there was only one face that came to mind: I needed to call Mason. A long-distance relationship would be hard. But it was where my heart was leading. And, no matter what, I was going to follow. Chapter 21. I hadn't gone as far as blindfolding and throwing Julie into the back of my old sedan, but if it had come to that I certainly would have. It was early Sunday morning and Julie was still blinking the sleepiness out of her eyes as she sat in the passenger side seat in her pajamas. "You could have at least let me get dressed, Krista," Julie mumbled, clearly still half asleep. "Wherever it is you're taking me." I shoved one of Courtney's to-go coffee drinks into her hand and checked my rearview mirror as I drove down the street in the light morning traffic. "There was no time," I said, glancing over at her. "Plus, you won't be needing clothes for what we're doing." She frowned, taking a slow sip of coffee. "Oh, so good. Needed this. What exactly are we doing that you had to drag me out of bed at 7 on a Sunday for?" "I didn't drag you out of bed," I said, stopping at a red light in the heart of Sacramento. "I pushed you out of bed." She threw her hands up into the air. "And that's better?" "It's different," I said, enjoying keeping my plan a secret from Julie. If I told her what I was making her do, then there's no way I would have gotten her out of the house without kidnapping her. This way was much more civil. "You're lucky you brought me coffee," she said. I pulled into a parking spot outside of Ticket to Anywhere. "We're here." Krista, you do know it's Sunday, right?" she asked, glancing over at me. I grinned and turned off the car. "No better time to get a head start on the week than Sunday morning, that's what they say," I said, getting out. "Nobody says that," she said, getting out of the car. "I'm a workaholic and I don't even say that." "You're a passionate workaholic," I said, as she followed me inside the building in her sheep-covered flannel pajamas. "If anyone sees me in this, you'll be making it up to me for 20 years. Maybe 30. "Noted," I said, unlocking the front door to Ticket to Anywhere. "Krista, I thought you're going to turn down the promotion," she said. I nodded. "I am. I thought you're going to go work at Founding Friendships." "True again. Doesn't that mean you aren't working here anymore?" "It does." We walked over to my new office and I pulled out the leather chair for her. She stopped, crossed her arms over her tiny jumping sheep, and narrowed her eyes at me. "What are you up to?" she asked. "Being a good friend is all," I said, nodding toward the seat. "Now sit before I force you." Her eyes were suspicious as she sank into the seat. I leaned over her and grabbed the phone and started to dial. "Krista?" she asked, glancing between me and the number I was dialing. "What are you doing?" The phone started ringing and I handed the receiver to Julie. I dialed Mason's number. "My boss?" she asked, making a move to hang up the phone. I lunged forward to stop her from hanging up. This should be your office, not mine, and not anyone else's. You're going to talk to Mason and tell him those great ideas in Tahiti were your ideas, I said, as she shook her head with wide, frightened eyes. No, I can't. You can, I insisted. You're going to be brave and speak up for yourself. You deserve the manager position and you're going to tell Mason exactly that. She tried once more to hang up, but I stopped her. Julie, I believe in you, I said. Her face turned pale and she gave a strangled yelp. He answered, she whispered. I nodded at the phone. Well, say hello. Hello. Mr. McKinney? Julie's voice was strained and she placed her hand over the receiver and looked up at me in a panic. Krista, I can't, she whispered. I pulled her hand from the receiver and pointed. You can. Mr. McKinney, I was hoping to discuss with you the open leadership position here at Ticket to Anywhere, she said, her voice shaky, but growing stronger with each word. Julie nodded and then glanced up at me. He wants to talk in person, she whispered. Great, I said, giving her a thumbs up. My stomach tightened at the thought of him on the other end of the line. Was he still in French Polynesia? Or had he moved on to Fiji? Had he lost his pages on another beach? The thought made my heart sink. She furrowed her brow. Well, yes. I am in the office. How did you know? She rolled her eyes and put a hand over the receiver. He saw the number on his cell phone. Talk to him, I said, urging her on, trying to ignore the hole in my heart that had taken up residence since I'd left the islands. Wait, you're here? In the office? She asked. A door opened with a click behind us. At the same time, Julie and I turned toward the corner office, which had belonged to Andrea. There in the doorway stood Mason. His eyes found mine and my heart rate kicked up, before he turned to Julie and gestured into his office. Miss Higgins, he said, giving her outfit an odd look. You should have let me change, she mouthed to me as she hurried across the way. I cringed at her death glare and waited until she disappeared behind the closed office door before I panicked. While they talked, I paced the office floor, my mind whirling. What was he doing here? Why wasn't he traveling like he'd said? I was lost in my thoughts and the pounding of my heart when the door opened again and Julie came out with a beaming smile. She flashed me 2 big thumbs up and my heart warmed. I moved toward the front door, planning to leave with her, but she squeezed my arm. You need to go talk to not someone, she whispered, nodding toward Mason who was leaning against the wall outside his office. My mouth went dry. He told you? She shook her head. It's written all over both your faces. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, I said, grimacing. Nothing can get me down today, I just got a fat promotion, she said, hugging me before snatching my keys and heading toward the exit door. I watched the door fall closed before turning around and facing Mason. You're a good friend to let her confess to all of the ideas, he said, smiling as he watched me. We need honest people like you at Ticket to Anywhere. I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. About that. His eyebrows rose. Yes? I'm actually giving notice. I lifted my eyes from the carpet to Mason after I said this, seeing the clear surprise on his face. Surprise and something more, intrigue perhaps. May I ask why? He said, his green eyes flashing. I lifted my chin. I've learned that following your passion is important. Someone made me realize I shouldn't sacrifice my dreams for practicality. That sometimes you have to take a second chance in order to reach for something more. He nodded. What will you be doing instead? I'll be working for a homeless outreach organization called Founding Friendships. I've volunteered there for years and now I'll be working there full-time. I'm sorry to lose you, he said, the corner of his mouth hitching upward. But I saw how passionate you were volunteering at the dog shelter, so I understand that philanthropic work is your passion. My heart ached at how well he knew me. I'll help you find a replacement. Why don't you come in and we'll get the paperwork all sorted, he said, backing into his office. I followed after him, but stopped in the doorway with a little gasp. What the? Scattered across the desk and floor of the large office were endless pieces of torn papers. The image instantly took me back to the beach that night beneath the moonlight when I'd followed the trail of pages along the shore, leading me to Mason. I looked over at him in confusion before kneeling to pick up one torn piece. I frowned. What are these? They're my tickets for the next year, he explained, using a soft voice. Train tickets, plane tickets, bus and ferry and tram tickets. Tickets for all over the world. My gaze moved over the dozens of torn pieces around the office, all leading to him, like the inevitable end of a rainbow. You destroyed them, I whispered, looking to him for explanation. Technically, I got refunds via customer service, he said, spreading his arms wide. This is more metaphorical to show that you were right about me. I was traveling nonstop because I was running away from the pain of my father's death. I've been afraid to face it and to accept that my mom was getting remarried. That part was hard. I'm sorry. My heart ached for him, the piece of ticket falling from my fingers. I flew home and went to see my mom, he said, waves of emotion crossing his handsome features as he stepped toward me. It was difficult, but we talked and I met her fiancé. That's very brave of you, I said, taking a step toward him. Thanks, he said, his green eyes softening. I've accepted that she's moving on. She deserves a new dream. I stepped closer to him. We were no more than an arm's width away. But what about your book? I asked. I have enough stories for 5 books, he said, closing the distance between us. I want to start a new story. You do? I asked, a shiver rolling through me. He cupped my face in his hands. I stared up into his eyes and saw the green of the Tahitian waters, but also the green of the tree at the park across the street and the green of a tiny pair of eyes in the future, our future. A new story with you, Krista, he said, looking vulnerable in a way that tugged at my heart. I'm sorry for disappointing you in Amoria. I wasn't disappointed, I said, my throat tightening. I was surprised or afraid or a million other things. I thought you would be living in Florida or traveling. I'll be living here, he said. I'd be so happy if you want to start an adventure with me. You would? I asked, his lips so close to mine I could feel their heat like the heat of the white sands in Amoria. I nodded a weak nod as my knee threatened to buckle. What do you say? He whispered. I smiled. I say tearing up those tickets was very impractical. True, he said, his eyes searching mine as he waited. I'd love a second chance with you, I said, my heart soaring as if it might burst with happiness at this new dream. Done, he said, the corners of his mouth curving upward as he leaned forward and kissed me. Tingles danced up and down my spine as he kissed me, as if I were plunging into tropical waters, driving atop mountains, and dancing in front of fire. This kiss felt brave and bold and reckless. And so, when he leaned back and smiled at me, I wrapped my arms around his neck and pulled him back in for another kiss, one that said all I wanted to say, that I felt so ready for this new adventure together. Epilogue. The sign overhead spelled out "Welcome to Thailand" in several languages. With my suitcase beside me, I stopped beneath that sign and grinned up at it. Mason had walked several steps ahead before he realized I wasn't beside him. He looked back over his shoulder and then hurried back to me. "Honey, is everything all right?" he asked, sounding concerned. "No," I said, shaking my head. In fact, I was exhausted after several long flights, having been crammed into seats that only grew more uncomfortable the longer you sat in them. I felt hot and sticky from the heavy humidity, which was saying something inside an air-conditioned airport. My hair was a frizzy mess and I could already feel my shirt sticking to my back. My nerves were frazzled arriving into a foreign country with unique customs and a language I could barely manage hello in. The next 2 weeks would be full of unknowns and uncertainties and certainly lots of confusing and awkward situations. I was outside my comfort zone and there was no turning back. And yet I couldn't stop smiling, and all it took was one glance from the "Welcome to Thailand" sign to my boyfriend's handsome face and gentle green eyes to know my answer with certainty. "In fact, I'm perfect," I said, intertwining my fingers with his. He leaned over and pressed a tender kiss to my forehead. "Good," he said. "Actually, I'm nervous and a little scared, but I'm also perfect, absolutely perfect." He smiled and I smiled, too. We stood there together, ignoring the odd stares from people who were forced to go around us since we were stopped right there in the middle of the terminal. We didn't care. We were lost in each other's eyes. "There's a whole new adventure here, Krista," he said, eyeing the glass doors parting ahead of us. "A whole new story." "I'm ready," I said. He squeezed my hand. "Then let's go." I nodded and together we stepped into the wonderful, exciting, and very impractical unknown. The end. You have been listening to the Island Date, Do-Over Date series, Book 7, by Susan Hatler, copyright 2021 by Susan Hatler, audiobook copyright 2023 by Susan Hatler. Susan Hatler is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author who writes humorous and emotional women's fiction and young adult novels. Many of Susan's books have been translated into German, Spanish, French, and Italian. A natural optimist, she believes life is amazing, people are fascinating, and imagination is endless. She loves spending time with her characters and hopes you do, too.